Hello, romance lovers. Today's story is called I'm a Worthless Stepmother, but I Love My Family Madly. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out on more exciting stories. The main character remembers how, since childhood, she did not receive due attention from her parents, and all because they had another girl, whom they often held by the hand in front of everyone, not even paying attention to the first child. And besides the fact that she felt very lonely in such a huge mansion, she also imagined herself as a tied lady who had no right to her own opinion in life, but only existed as a tool in someone's hands. However, she could not believe that one day everything would change dramatically, because not only a loved one appeared in her life, but also two cute boys who hugged her, showing their love. The blue-eyed brunette, who is clearly one of the highest aristocrats, confessed to the girl that he did not want her to leave, and that he really felt bad without her, which is why the lady could not even believe her ears. The nobleman also told the protagonist about the children, who at that time were looking at the blonde and also did not let her go, looking into her eyes and grabbing her dress with their hands, which hinted that they also did not want to let her go. Because of their cuteness and beauty, the girl, who also has red, garnet eyes and snow-white hair, could not refuse them, because she looked at them with affection and delight, realizing that she could not leave, because she had become attached to them, which was more like a fairy tale in her life. And it all started a couple of months ago in the Duchy of Sonberg. Or rather, on the day when the main character was sitting at a long table in her company and bent down to pick up a knife that had fallen from the floor, but it seemed that the others weren't paying attention. Her younger sister, named Karan, in a cute pink flowered dress, who was raising a fork with a piece of food to her face, looked at her elder sister with disdain and mockery, telling her to pull herself together and not to act clumsy. The same words were spoken by the protagonist's stepmother, named Claudia, who wiped her lips with a white napkin, telling the heroine to be more careful and focus on the family meal, where she needed to behave appropriately. In response, Elsha, a girl with snow-white hair and in a modest blue dress, who was also the daughter of the Duke of Sonberg, sighed heavily with her eyes closed and asked everyone for forgiveness for the noise. While Elsha remembered that they had been having dinner together for 6 months already, as a family, which irritated her to the depths of her soul, Karan and Elsha's father also sighed, closed his eyes, and told his eldest daughter that she needed to be collected, because in a month she would be marrying Duke Icebell. Having heard such shocking information for her, which Dad for some reason said very calmly and monotonously, the girl with red eyes was so amazed that she immediately fell silent, trying to believe what was said. At the same time, she imagined in her head that same Duke Icebell, his cloak and armor, remembering that it was he who put an end to the long-standing war between the Sanrail Empire and the neighboring kingdom of Silboa. But these were not his only merits. It terrified her to remember that even though he had achieved victory, he could often be cruel to his enemies and even to his allies, as he turned them into ice statues with doll-like hands, which his own magic allowed him to do. Remembering the rumors that the Duke had killed his own brother in order to become the head of the duchy, and also remembering that he was considered obsessed with war, the girl became frightened and began to shake, trying to understand whose wife she would be. And while she sat stunned at the table, trying to believe her dad, her father told her that it was the king's order, because in the protagonist they saw an age-appropriate candidate for the Duke, who could not remain alone all his life. Holding a glass of drink in front of his face, Duke Sonneberg told his daughter to get ready right now, if she only found out about it at this moment, since she would soon have to leave her home. As soon as the heroine tried to object or say at least something, the stepmother in the family immediately intervened in the conversation, looked at her husband with a smile, and told him that she would be responsible for preparing Elsha for marriage. Immediately after this, the head of the family ordered everyone not to talk about this to him anymore, since all the issues had been resolved. But the first to decide to break the silence was the protagonist's younger sister, who admiringly asked everyone what awaited her at the upcoming birthday, which turned out to be more important to her than her sister's marriage. But the main character, Elsha, just shrugged her shoulders and began to cut the dish into pieces with a smile, thinking that once again her own birthday seemed much more important to her difficult sister than some kind of sister's marriage, which doesn't even matter to her. However, when she realized that it had always been like this in her life, she remembered those years when she lay in her big bed and could already hear strange noises in the hallway, as if everyone was getting ready for something. But the girl did not get up. Not because of drowsiness, but because of a cold, because she was coughing. There was a wet cloth on her forehead to ease the heat, but it didn't help either, because the lady was all red and sweaty from her illness. But even in this state, she looked at the door and wanted to know why everyone was making such a noise, as if something important was about to happen. And as soon as she opened the door, she saw in the spacious corridor many maids who were carrying baskets of flowers and other items in their hands, as if they were planning to receive important guests. But everything turned out to be a little different. The curious girl decided to ask one red-haired servant what exactly was planned, to which the maid replied that today was Miss Karen's, her younger sister's, birthday, and therefore everyone had work to do regarding what to prepare and create for the little girl. Not hearing a joyful answer from Elsha, but only a cough, the maid doubtfully and with a basket of flowers in her hands asked the little girl if she would be present at the celebration, as if the child's appearance did not bother her. And the presence of everyone at Karen's grand birthday was the most important thing. And to this, the embarrassed lady with redness on her face replied that unfortunately, she would not be able to attend the celebration due to poor health, also saying this with a smile, pretending that everything was fine, although in fact everything was not so. After this, the girl in the white nightgown hurried back to bed and did not disturb anyone else, listening behind the wall to a conversation about how she and her sister had different mothers, which was causing problems in the family. And when she covered herself with a white blanket, sadly realizing that her parents didn't even come to see her, and all because of the birthday of her younger sister, whom they loved the most, the protagonist listened to the maids talking about how Elsha's birthday, on the contrary, was never celebrated. The girl cried from despair and sadness, while tears rolled down her cheeks and fell on the pillow, because people in the corridor remembered that her birthday was also the anniversary of her mother's death. So no holidays were planned on this day, even for a little lady. Because of this, the girl remembered her mother, a woman in a cute dress and with golden hair braided into a braid, also remembering that she died shortly after her birth. So she did not even have the chance to see her in person or say a few words. Sometime after the death of her mother, the main character had a stepmother, who became her father's second wife. A woman who has a sweet appearance, pink eyes, and the same light hair. But Elsha was never close to her. And a year after the start of the new marriage, Elsha's younger sister named Karan appeared in the family, who turned out to be a lady like her mother, loving pink dresses and loud birthdays, where all the attention is paid to her. Back then, when she was little, Elsha didn't understand why her father and stepmother avoided her. But now that she's grown up and is sitting at the table chewing a piece of food, she understands that she can't do anything about it, and it seems that they don't like her here at all. At this time, Karen was cheerfully talking about her birthday and even looked at her older sister with admiration, admitting that she was still worried about Elsha because she was getting married. But the protagonist was in no hurry to believe the little girl's words. The stepmother also hastened to speak out mockingly, looking at her stepdaughter and telling everyone that, unlike her own daughter, Elsha does not know how to use magic at all and is not strong in the social aspect, which is why she is worried that the protagonist will not disgrace their family with her behavior in the Duke's house. And after that, the little girl folded her arms and with feigned sadness told her parents that because of her older sister, she could be called a laughingstock, because Elsha was already a burden to the Sonneberg family. And then she wanted her to leave, because then the reputation of the whole family would be better. Only after hearing her daughter's words about how it was the eldest daughter who was a disgrace to their ducal family, Maha angrily asked the protagonist what she thought about it, as if she wanted to hear her opinions about how it was she who was superfluous. But in response, the girl only smiled at everyone, saying that she agreed with their words because if she married the Grand Duke, it would be a shame not only for their family, but for the entire empire. However, when the girl also confessed that they were all using her just to keep their beloved daughter Karan in the family, the stepmother became even more angry, asking Elsha if she was questioning her father's decision, which was unacceptable. In response, the girl with white, long hair only hurried to get up from her chair and leave the table, telling everyone that she did not consider her father's actions wrong and did not want to argue with them either. She walked past the table as the wind played with her long curls, and as she explained to everyone that she was just stating the facts and that she realized that her family was using her, but she still had a few questions. But also, before the UII, she put her hand on her cleavage and looked at everyone with a smile, asking why she also did not take advantage of the kindness of the family and thus prepare her in the best possible way for an ideal marriage. And a month later, the main character was already in a carriage that was taking her straight to a new house, which was so far away that the entire road was covered in thick snow, and the wind was scattering snowflakes that were falling from the sky without stopping. Also in the carriage with the protagonist was a woman named Marcia, who was crying and holding a handkerchief in her hand, because of which the main character calmed her down, telling her not to cry, because everything was fine and they would be able to see each other. The red-eyed lady looked at Marcia with the realization that the maid loved her like a mother, did everything possible for her, and she even regretted that she could not take several maids from home with her, and therefore Elsa was parting with them all. The girl continued to read in the carriage, which eventually stopped, and the door of the transport opened for the lady to get out. She thought that maybe it was not so bad that she was leaving her home, where she was not loved, and therefore she might be able to build a new life. The first person to greet her was the head servant with gray hair and glasses, who bowed to the lady and welcomed her to her new home, bowing slightly as well. But he still looked at the lady, surprised by her appearance. But the protagonist herself was surprised not by the servants, but by the place she came to, because the mansion was snow-white and very tall, with many floors, and there was snow everywhere, which only decorated the mansion with a blue roof. She thought that now she would live in such a place, and only this thought made her surprised. But as soon as she turned around, the carriage in which she was riding turned around and drove away, as if now there was no way back. And the girl looked at the departing carriage with red eyes, not understanding when the Duke would appear and what exactly she should expect. But she had no idea that the first person she would meet would not be him at all. She turned to the butler and asked him with a smile where the Duke was now, to which the servant did not rush to answer immediately, but mumbled something, as if he had something to hide or not to say. But she did not expect at all to hear the voices of children behind her, or rather, boys who were standing on the threshold and almost shouting, asking the girl who she was, clearly not welcoming a guest into their home. It seemed that even the butler himself did not expect that the Duke's sons would come out to the girl, and therefore his face showed no less surprise than the heroine's, who was already turning around and saw little boys before her eyes. They treat Elsa with caution, because the brunette with blue eyes angrily glanced at the protagonist, while his brother was about to cry behind his back, but still glanced at the heroine and seemed to want to know who she was. But as soon as the heroine told the guys that she was the bride of the Duke who lived here, the two brothers were immediately stunned and even turned blue from shock, because they realized that the stranger meant their father. The first to react to this was the eldest of the brothers, who immediately began to create crystal magic in his hand, telling the girl that everything was wrong, which made the lady even more wary, because, unlike the child, she was powerless in magic. And when the blue-eyed boy had a real snowflake in his hand, and with his arms outstretched he was ready to attack the heroine with magic, he proclaimed that he had never heard that the Duke was going to marry anyone. He even said angrily that even if his father had married, he would definitely not have married a bride like the heroine, and these words seemed to hit Elsa in the head, and she stood with her mouth slightly open in shock and did not know how to react. The brunette continued to insist on his own and shout at the protagonist to get out of here as soon as possible, because she was a swindler, an imposter who wanted to profit from the Duke, while his younger brother remained silent and hid behind the older one's back. And all this made Elsa stand with a stunned face and look at the boys with exactly that expression, realizing that she was already in a difficult situation, although she did not even have time to enter the mansion and understand who these guys were. Therefore, the girl decided to calmly tell the boys that she was proposing to discuss everything in a calm environment, and she also waved her hands and with excitement on her face persuaded the children not to be aggressive, but the boys still did not like her. However, the brunette with blue eyes himself was surprised first of all by the fact that the blonde with red eyes began to fear even his little magic, which is why he hastened to ask the lady if she really was afraid of magic of such a small level. He looked at her with his big eyes and asked with interest whether she was really a simple girl, incapable of magic, and how, in that case, did she want to become the wife of the Grand Duke. Elisha told the boys that everything was really so, but she was not a commoner, since she came straight from the ducal family. And immediately after that, the heroine in a pink dress and a white fur coat shouted out, asking the boys who they were. And the boys were truly surprised by the girl's words, looking at the lady with round eyes and began to ask the guest if she really didn't know who they were. At that moment, the main character looked at the children in shock, because she remembered that the former Duke was the older brother of the current Grand Duke, and it turns out that he adopted his nephews, which is why the lady wondered why she was not warned about this before. But when the lady realized that she had come to this house not just to be a bride for the Duke, but also to be a mother to adopted children, it seemed to dawn on her, which is why the shock on her face was still bright and strong. However, she did not expect at all that when she would stand still in amazement, the magic that the brunette had created for defense would take effect, causing a snowflake to fly past her face and scratch her face, causing the lady to be horrified. After the disturbing incident, the two boys began to shake from shock, which was clearly visible even to the main character. So the lady wondered why they looked more surprised than she did, despite the fact that it seemed like they were not guilty of anything. However, the lady quickly found answers to her questions because she saw that the older brother was protecting the younger one with his hand and did not allow him to even take a step, because they were both afraid and thought that the main character was a threat to them. Then the protagonist with a scratch on her cheek realized with sympathy and sadness that they are very cute and small, so much so that even an unnoticeable scratch can scare them and bring them to tears. And it seems the lady realized that she wants to fix everything. She also thought about it this way because she saw herself in the little boys as a child, who cried and also thought that she was defenseless. And that is why now Elsha wants to make friends with children who are literally shaking with fear in front of her. And the boys were very surprised that the lady in the pink dress suddenly sat down in front of them and kindly apologized to them for possibly scaring them. And because of this, the stunned boys even took a couple of steps away from her in amazement. But what surprised everyone even more was that the blonde in front of them smiled even despite the scratch on her cheek, which made it seem like the world around them became brighter. And the protagonist was just telling the children her name and asking everyone to get to know her better. The kindness and sincerity of the main character became a real discovery for the children, who looked at the lady as if they did not expect to hear such a thing from her. And the youngest of the boys even became interested in the protagonist, which was evident in his eyes. Only after this did the boys decide to tell the heroine their names, and the first to do so was the brunette with blue eyes, who introduced himself as Wilbert, and he said that his younger brother's name was Hugh, while the boy himself did not dare to speak, but only hid and looked at the guest with green eyes. The shy children wanted to ask the bride about the scratch on her face, but when the blonde answered with a smile that it was nothing, because she had received worse wounds in her life, Wilbert immediately grabbed her hand and pulled it towards himself, shouting that everything was wrong. However, after some time after that, when the boys realized that the lady would not harm them and was kind, they stood up and were already preparing to turn towards the doors of the mansion, telling her that in that case they would help her, and also Wilbert asked the protagonist to follow them. The lady briefly told the children that they did not need any compensation for what they had done to her, as nothing bad had happened, which made the butler named Toman smile, and then he politely told the guests to go inside. As soon as the heroine entered the mansion and allowed the servants to heal the scratches on her face, after some time the protagonist saw her head in the mirror, wrapped in such a thick layer of bandage that a silent shock immediately appeared on her face. And at that time, Toman was smiling behind her. However, the girl stopped paying attention to her appearance and looked at the butler when he began to speak, saying that he was sure that at first glance all this seemed inappropriate to her. But first he would like to inform her that Wilbert's mother was physically weak. And when Toman also told the heroine with bandages on her head that even the slightest scratch could keep Wilbert's mother in bed for days due to her terrible health, the lady realized why her eldest son was so frightened by her wound. At that moment, she saw herself in the mirror and realized that these children had lost their parents too early, and that was why they were acting so anxious and insecure. And the Grand Duke had adopted them, while being their own uncle, and she imagined in her head a bride in a white dress and with a bouquet of flowers. When Toman told her that he himself planned to tell the boys about the bride after their adoptive father returned from the expedition, but he also admitted that he was sure that the bride would come to their house later. Hearing this, the lady who was looking at herself in the mirror was surprised, because as planned, she was supposed to arrive at the beginning of the year. But it turned out that she was rushed and forced to leave her home earlier, which makes her wonder why everything happened in such an awkward way. She frowned when she realized that she had only managed to prepare for this brother until the end of the year, and she was being rushed too much with this, apparently to quickly get rid of the extra person in the family. And also at this time, she told the butler that most likely this was just a misunderstanding. She turned and confessed to Toman that she had been so rushed into marriage because everyone considered it to be the most important thing in life. Although after that, the lady said that it didn't matter, also asking again when exactly the Grand Duke would return. Then the butler told the lady about the letter in which the Duke personally told the servants that he would not be able to return at the scheduled time, that is, last week, and the aristocrat did not specify the reason for his delay. Hearing this, the blonde with bandages on her head immediately became indignant, looking at the Duke with anger and asking how this was possible, because he needed to be here and raise boys who needed their parents' attention. Then Toman explained to the protagonist that she was right, but the Duke really did often leave the house for special business in unforeseen circumstances, which is why he often had to turn away from the children and leave them. Remembering the past Duke with long gray hair and mustache, the butler tells the heroine that the former aristocrat in this house was also involved in a strange situation with the former warring kingdom, which is still unstable, and because of that, the nobility has a lot of trouble. Toman also told the boy's biological mother, a mysterious girl with bright lips and a hat on her head, recalling that she was now restoring her strength and health in a new place, in a warm climate, where it was good and nothing disturbed her. The servant told all this to the guest in the mansion and recalled all the events of the past with sadness on his face. After which the bandaged lady replied that she did not know this. And judging by her sad voice, this also upset her and made her think. After that, the heroine thought seriously and even raised her hand to her chin, realizing that her impression of this place was very different from the one she had built based on rumors when she lived in the capital. But the lady still felt sorry for the children who were left alone in such a large palace. That's why after a while she appeared in front of Wilbur and with a smile on her face said that there had been a lot of misunderstandings between them, but now they could consider themselves a full-fledged family. But the boy, reading a book at the table, only looked at her with surprise. But she was also surprised when the boy simply closed the book, got up from the table, and simply walked away from her in the other direction, telling her that he did not need to be flattered and that she could also do whatever she wanted until the Duke arrived. The lady expected that she would be answered rudely the first time and therefore was not upset, but only clenched her hand into a fist with a smile, thinking that she would not give up so easily and would try again to win the attention of the children. However, after some time, when the girl still could not get closer to the children even one step, she sat as if in the dark, when her soul could already leave her from fatigue, because the children turned out to be very withdrawn and distrustful of her. She realized that her brothers had a very busy schedule with school and other activities, and she was also sure that they saw her as a bear with big paws who wanted to eat them as soon as possible, and they were just trying to escape from her. But now Elsa grabbed her head and realized again that if she established contact with the boys, it would be easier for her to be in this house, which meant she needed to stick to this plan in order to try to be close to Hugh and Wilbert. Thinking about what she could do to get closer to the children, she appeared in the kitchen among the maids and spoiled what kind of food Wilbert likes, which surprised the girls, looking at the heroine and answering her that they do not know. And the red-haired girl with green eyes told the protagonist that Wilbert is not picky about food, and on the contrary, often does not eat. And his younger brother Hugh, on the contrary, eats whatever he wants. But he also never said what exactly he likes about food. Then, listening to the maids also whispering and laughing at something, remembering Hugh, the thoughtful lady realized that most likely because of the monotonous diet, the ladies did not even pay attention to the food. The main character also remembered how she went to other maids and asked them about what exactly the little brothers liked, but none of them could give a clear answer, which only helped to understand that the boys were very withdrawn. When, thanks to questioning all the servants, the girl realized that no one even knew what exactly children liked, the lady imagined herself as a child behind her own back, because the feeling of loneliness and detachment was very familiar to her. But suddenly, at the moment when the girl was already thinking that she had gotten into a more difficult situation, a tall and muscular, menacing cook appeared behind her, who said something about carrot cake in his rough voice, which made the lady scared and shudder. As soon as she turned to the tall man, she saw a calm and dark-skinned guy in front of her, who said that he had lived through the times when children had to eat tasteless food, but for the sake of carrot cake, they were ready to do anything. Also, the maids appeared near the cook, who explained to the protagonist that they did not think that they could like the pie now, because they had not eaten it exactly since the moment when their own father died, and that was why they did not even want to remember about the pie. And while the main character already understood what she needed to do, Wilbert was busy with something else, because books seemed to be falling from the sky in packs, along with papers, because the boy had to learn all their contents. The boy himself banged his forehead on the table and was angry, also clenching his hands into fists because he had no motivation to study. And now studying was very difficult for him. Even when the main character entered his room, the boy did not look at her, but only got angry, looking at the open book and telling Elsa that he had nothing to talk about with her. But the protagonist was not going to leave so easily. The thing is that Elsa wanted to reach out to the boy with the words that Wilbert was still a child, and she was hinting that he needed to rest more, because his face had even turned pale from fatigue. But this did not mean anything good for the brunette. The aggressive boy hit the main character's palm with his hand and angrily told her not to interfere with his studies, because according to him, he is a future duke, and therefore he needs to study continuously to become a worthy Aristotle. And he even shouted that he does not want to talk to such a lazy girl like Elsa, because she does not even know how to use magic. And when the lady left, which made Wilbert think that Elsa was the same ordinary girl as the others, he did not suspect that at the same time the bride of the Grand Duke was persistently and decisively walking along the corridor towards his room. Bursting into the room with a bang and opening the door wide, the girl with red eyes and inspiration on her face showed the boy a tray with some kind of dish and immediately apologized for the fact that he had to wait for her new arrival. Wilbert shouted towards the lady, asking her what she had come up with this time. But as it turned out, the girl brought a beautiful and unusual carrot cake on a tray, appetizing in appearance. But for the brunette with blue eyes, this was far from joyful because of the memories with his mother. But he fell silent the moment the protagonist turned out to be not just a persistent lady, but a kind and sweet lady who knelt down in front of him and with a smile asked the boy to try at least one piece of the pie. And this time, the boy listened to the girl because he picked up a fork and silently prepared to try the first piece of carrot cake, which he loved as a child, but stopped eating, all because of the painful loss of his mother, who baked it for him. As soon as the boy tried a small piece of pie and chewed it with some disdain, the protagonist looked at him with such enthusiasm and hope that there was already joy in her soul, just because Wilbert agreed to do at least something for her. However, she was even more surprised by the fact that the guy did not get angry with her that time, but only silently stuck a new piece of pie into his fork in order to try his favorite pastry again, and then a third, fourth time. The taste of carrot cake made the angry and cold boy melt, causing his sweet blue eyes to sparkle and he himself to blush, because he could finally taste the very food that made him happier in the past. Seeing this, Elsa was also happy, looked at the boy with a smile and told him that this was a real relief for her, because she was afraid that he would not like the carrot cake. But immediately after this, Wilbert got up from his chair and became embarrassed, indignantly shouting that everything was wrong. He tried to explain to the main character that he just felt a pleasant nostalgia, which is why he liked the pie. But at that moment, the protagonist only smiled even more sincerely, asking the child if he remembered anything. Also, suddenly, the girl told the boy that the taste of the pie was a little strange for the reason that she decided to cook it using a slightly different recipe from another continent, more precisely, from the region of Lusuvoir, which is next to them. Then the guy looked at the carrot cake and asked the main character why she decided to use a little-known recipe for the carrot cake from a region that is close to them, because it is more logical to prepare the pastry in the way that is customary in the Empire. The protagonist then decided to confess to the boy that she used the unusual recipe because the region in which it was popular was the birthplace of Clara, the baby's biological and deceased mother, which made Wilbert instantly shut up. At that moment, special and very warm memories of his mother seemed to come into his head, and it seemed to dawn on him, from which he opened his lips and began to look at the blonde in surprise, remembering the most important moments of his life when his mother was alive. Seeing this, the red-eyed lady smiled wider and asked the child directly if any good memories of his mother had come to him, as if that was exactly what she had intended to achieve by offering the boy a taste of his favorite pie. Then, remembering his own mother with a pie in her hands and in a peach dress, to whom Wilbert ran, he told the heroine that in fact his mother baked a dry and often tasteless pie, but often she tried, and she managed to bake something tasty and divine, which he remembered forever. This also made the main character smile sweetly, telling Wilbert that his mother must have really valued him if she tried to do even what she found difficult. And when the lady fell silent, looking at the boy with a smile, she clearly noticed that Wilbert's whole body began to shake as if from anxiety, while he himself agreed with the words of his interlocutor, saying that something was bothering him. Then the boy couldn't stand it and shouted at the protagonist, saying, "Why did she make such a delicious pie?" which he did with indignation and a blush on his face. And this shocked Elsa so much that she didn't know how to respond. And the confused lady showed the guy her index finger and said with a pale face that most likely it was because of the tasty carrots, as well as the high-quality harvest, which turned out to be the best in recent times. After that, the curious and more polite boy looked at the lady with blue eyes and admitted that he didn't even think that winter carrots existed, and also told her that even though she was the Duke's daughter and couldn't use magic, her ability to cook delicious food from border ingredients surprised him. And when Wilbert asked the lady where exactly she got such interesting knowledge, the blonde began to visibly tremble and sweat from excitement, because she did not think that such a sweet and small child would think so clearly and sensibly. As it turned out, Wilbert made the main character remember her life with his questions, which is why the lady began to worry, but still smiled, telling the baby that she had reasons for this. But it was a sad story, and she did not want to tell it to such a small child like him. To this, the teenager replied that he was a future duke and therefore did not want the girl to treat him like a child. But this made the protagonist clearly sad and silent. But she also realized that she needed to tell the boy the truth in order to calm his curiosity. Then, with an empty and in fact feigned smile, the lady confessed to Wilbert that her mother had died after she was born, and therefore she had no memories of her. And upon hearing this, the brunette with blue eyes was amazed and fell silent. But he still lifted her head, and with sincere curiosity and sympathy, asked the lady what this had to do with their conversation, and he did not even expect that the protagonist would tell him something special. With the same sweet smile on her face, which made the girl look exactly like a ray of sunshine, the blonde confessed to the boy that the role of mother in her life was played by a maid named Marcia, her biological mother's closest friend. Because of the conversation about herself, the lady remembered in her head the warmest moments. Koa was next to Marcia, and laughed with her, played, spent time with her even when she was little. And she also told the child that it was the maid who told her a lot about her mother. The girl also pictured her mother's golden hair in a braid in her head, telling Wilbert that the lack of memories made her want to recreate some of her mother's favorite dishes. The first thing the lady remembered was how she fried pieces of fish and other meat in a fragrant sauce, which was one of the very first dishes that she wanted to recreate in memory of her deceased mother. She also remembered how she had kneaded dough in a bowl in the past and gradually explored the culture and recipes of different regions, which is how she came to know the recipe for the very pie she had prepared for Wilbert. And now the lady pointed her fingers at the carrot cake she had prepared, finishing her short but touching story, which made everything clear to the curious and shocked guy, and he found the answers to all the questions. The blue-eyed boy looked at the lady with understanding and admitted that he believed her words and knew that she was not lying, but he just did not understand why she did not leave this work to the servants of the house and not try to cook herself. Then the lady remembered herself at a very young age, holding a book in her hands and seeming to be all alone, which is why she told Wilbert that in her house everyone had a strict job and was always busy with something, so she did not want to distract them because of her selfish desires. However, right after this, the protagonist cheerfully told the guy that she had a lot of free time before all this, and that was also very good. But in fact, the blonde no longer wanted to talk to the baby about sad things, wanting to cheer him up. The brunette, sitting at the table, also heard from the lady's story that because of her younger sister, to whom all the tutors were given, she was unable to fully study everything and also magic. So he honestly told the heroine that she was treated cruelly, but the long-haired lady in front of him only sighed, admitting that she wanted to awaken good memories in Wilbert, and also apologized if he didn't like something. But Elsa was very surprised when the blue-eyed boy with redness on his face told the heroine not to apologize for something, and besides that, asked her to cook the carrot cake again, because he liked it incredibly. And the child's appearance and words touched the main character so much that she herself did not notice how she blushed and looked at him with admiration, as if now she saw in front of her not a cold boy, but a charming teenager, calm and understanding. Noticing this perfectly, Wilbert immediately blushed and began to shout at the girl with indignation, saying that by his request he did not mean that he liked everything, because in fact he wanted to treat his younger brother to a pie. But this also made the heroine smile, who also asked if he liked grilled meat and vegetables, because she knew how to cook that too. Even some time after this incident, the protagonist realized that she had become much closer to Wilbert, because even in those moments when she walked down the corridor and met him in front of her, she felt that he could not just pass by. However, when she tried to greet the boy and wish him good morning with a smile, she did not expect that this time Wilbert would persistently avoid her and not even look in her direction, while blushing and quickening his pace, deliberately ignoring her. The girl turned to the little aristocrat with complete devastation and disappointment, because her face even turned blue from being ignored when she realized that even after the carrot cake, Wilbert, on the contrary, began to avoid her more persistently. Then the girl seemed to despair completely, began to stagger from side to side, not understanding whether fate itself wanted her not to be close to the children, if they avoided her even when she managed to talk to Wilbert about food. But when the lady was already thinking about it, she needed to stop trying to get closer to the children and come to terms with her situation, when suddenly she heard strange cries of a man from one of the rooms with high doors, which is why the lady looked at her. The girl decided to eavesdrop and therefore leaned against the door with a wary face in order to understand what exactly was happening, and she did not expect at all that she would see an unpleasant picture with her own eyes. However, the lady wanted to quickly run to the window with snow-white bars in order to look out of it and notice something, recalling that usually the younger brother Hugh is engaged with the older brother, but this time everything is different. And from the window, the lady noticed that today Wilbert was practicing sword fighting without his brother, but with a teacher who helped the child from an early age to hone his skills and be able to hold a sword in his hands even until adulthood. The red-eyed lady fell silent because she thought that something terrible would happen if she spied on what was going on in the room, in which something interesting for her was clearly happening. And as soon as she looked through the crack in the door, the lady noticed a sad Hugh in the dressing room, next to whom was a teacher with glasses. And this looked more like a lesson that the child no longer really liked. Not everything turned out to be so calm because the teacher, who was clearly unhappy that his students had not mastered some information, hit the table with his hand with such force that it seemed the teacher's anger could burst out at any moment. The red-haired man with glasses and red hair started yelling at Hugh and asking him why he couldn't learn at least the basic information about low-level magic when he had already taught them all the information and repeated it 1,000,000 times before. Hugh didn't even want to answer this because fear and anxiety made him shake and remain silent, clutching in his hands a cute white toy, more like a plush otter, which the boy looked at, trying not to cry. For the teacher, this was only the beginning, because he began to laugh at the child and touch his head with his hand, telling Hugh that he had already realized that he and his older brother not only could not create the simplest magic, but also apologize for having to explain everything to them. And this greatly surprised the main character, who was still standing behind the half-open doors and understood that Hugh could not speak, and the teacher only shouted at him and scolded him for this, which amazed the protagonist. The teacher, with exactly the same smile, leaned closer to the frightened Hugh and began to tell him that in every historical family, children know how to use magic and study well, which he cannot say about them, because the Icebell brothers do not know how to do anything. At this point, the indignant main character realized that she could not leave the situation just like that, because you can't talk to children in a rude tone, especially when Hugh is a baby who still has to learn everything. She looked at Hugh, who was sitting at the table and couldn't even raise his head from fear, only clutching a toy in his hands and listening to the teacher's complaints. And the protagonist at that time was thinking that if she burst into the office now, she would only create problems because she was a stranger to them. The girl did not expect at all that her indecision would play a cruel joke on her, because suddenly the teacher was so tired of yelling at the frightened Hugh that he grabbed his soft toy in his hand and tore it out of the boy's arms. And when Hugh was already reaching out to his favorite thing, not wanting to lose it, the teacher only approached the open window closer and closer, telling the student that it was not appropriate for a future aristocrat to be constantly with toys, because he was not going to get rid of it. As expected, the teacher wanted to throw the boy's favorite thing out the window, which he was about to do with words about how it was precisely because of the brothers' bad manners and laziness that they did not have good parents. During the entire time, the frightened Hugh could not utter even one word, because he really could not speak, and therefore he could only watch with tears in his eyes as the teacher would relieve him of happiness in the form of his favorite otter. However, the teacher was unable to accomplish what he had planned, because suddenly female hands grabbed his wrist, and the voice of the main character was heard, who firmly said that the teacher did not deserve anything good in that world for his behavior. A girl with long white hair snatched the toy from the teacher, and when he touched his hand in pain, she became indignant and told him that parents are not the main indicator of talent in children, and all his words are lies. Elsa continued to angrily tell the teacher that Hugh was just a small child who had not yet learned to express his feelings, and therefore it was clear that learning magic would be difficult for him. But at that time, the boy himself stood up from his chair and looked at the lady with shock. The red-eyed lady with an angry face told the suddenly quiet teacher that he had no right to blame the little student for anything, because the problems in his education were only the result of his incompetence and cruelty, which he had definitely used on children more than once. Hearing such words from a person he was seeing for the first time in his life, the man with glasses and red hair became even more indignant, asking the lady how she dared to say such a thing to him. Although her appearance clearly shocked him no less than little Hugh, the blonde insisted that the teacher leave the room immediately, because he was no longer worthy of being a teacher for Wilbert and Hugh. But the man was only amazed at this, asking Elsa who she was and what right she had to interfere in the learning process. The lady had no plans to leave, but continued to insist on her own, and therefore looked at the teacher with complete confidence and determination, saying that she was the Grand Duchess and the mother of these children, and therefore had the right to deprive him of his job. However, no one expected that the one everyone had been waiting for would suddenly enter the room, because the tall man loudly stomped his boots on the stone floor, which attracted everyone's attention to him without exception. Hugh, along with Elsa and the teacher, turned to the door and were already surprised by the appearance of the most important person in the house in the room. And on the teacher's face, one could read not only shock, but also anxiety, because the situation was no longer in his favor. The fact is that a silent and stern-looking Grand Duke appeared in the office, dressed in dark, exquisite clothes with white fur, and in his eyes there was only anger, with which he approached every important matter. And his appearance so astonished the white-haired madam that she opened her mouth in surprise and looked at the Duke with defeat for a few more moments, because she had not expected to see him at such a seemingly inopportune moment. She looked at the dark-haired man with amazement, also from the understanding that he probably heard everything that happened in the office and even saw all the events, which meant that no one would be able to lie or escape, and this is precisely the main problem for the teacher. The intense and incredibly amazed look of the main character made the Duke look at the lady. But unlike her, he turned out to be completely calm and cold, only asking Elsa who she was, because he was seeing her for the first time. But alarmed by the appearance of the Grand Duke, the girl could not even utter her name, which is why she only looked at him with red eyes and sweated, while the teacher panikedly told the aristocrat that he was personally proposed by the ruler of the empire as a teacher for Hugh, thinking that the Duke was addressing him. But the aristocrat wanted to speak to the lovely lady, not to the teacher, and so he stood in front of her and took a wide step towards her, which made Lay step back and become anxious when the Duke asked her who she was. At that moment, the protagonist looked closely at the supposed warrior, dressed not only in leather armor, but also a fur cloak, thanks to which the sword behind his back was clearly visible, and she wondered whether the Aristosata knew about the marriage with her because she did not understand how best to introduce herself. Having gathered her determination, the girl raised her hand up so sharply and boldly that it came as a surprise to everyone, and she also said loudly with her eyes closed that her name was Elsa, because to do this she had to overcome her shyness and fear. But she immediately lowered her hand and fell silent after realizing that there was dead silence, and no one said even one word, which only embarrassed the girl and made her calmer. While the main character thought that everything was lost and she would no longer be able to wash away the shame, the Grand Duke himself turned around because he heard the voice of another boy behind him, hurrying to appear in front of everyone and greet the head of the house. It turned out to be Wilbert, who made an elegant curtsy and thereby bowed to the aristocrat, welcomed him home as a nobleman, but certainly not as a child, because the desire to be a true ruler makes him behave appropriately. At first, the Grand Duke remained silent, but then he slightly opened his lips and mumbled something in an approving tone, as if the appearance of the little Malik had truly surprised him, although no emotion close to amazement appeared on his face. But after that, he did not leave the main character alone, but on the contrary, he came even closer to her, which frightened the protagonist and made her look at him with caution when the tall man in front of her asked again who she was. A chill seemed to run through the girl's body along with goosebumps, which made her feel anxious again, and only because of it she opened her lips as if she wanted to answer, but fear and some embarrassment did not allow her to do so. Elsa also noticed behind the Duke's broad back that the blushing Wilbert suddenly turned away from her and headed in the other direction, which looked as if he himself was embarrassed by the appearance of the main character in the room. However, in front of her there still remained an angry and dissatisfied with her silence Grand Duke, who was looking at her intently and waiting for an answer, and the girl only understood that she was behaving extremely suspiciously, especially when she was silent. She found herself in a position where her answer could change a lot, because she saw in front of her not only the Duke, but also Hugh and Wilbert, and behind her stood the teacher, who were waiting to hear from her an answer to the question of who she was in this palace. And the one who pushed her towards the right decision was the frightened and silent Hugh, who was nearby and said nothing, but only squeezed and hugged his favorite toy otter, who stayed with him only because the protagonist intervened and wanted to change everything. Only then did the lady find the strength to introduce herself fully, bowing before the Duke and confessing to him that she was Elsa, and that this was their first meeting, and also told him that she was the daughter of the Duke of Sonneberg and his wife by decree of the Emperor. After this, the guy told the girl that he did not want to talk to her formally, but just wanted to know what she was doing here, to which the lady worshipping him replied that all this was the result of an emergency situation, and Elsa's words surprised the aristocrat. And when the girl confessed to the Duke that the teacher had mocked Hugh, wanted to throw his toy out the window and shouted at him, which greatly outraged Wilbert, who was stunned by such news. The black-haired tall aristocrat wanted to kneel before Hugh. This is what the lady with long white hair was looking at, who did not plan to lie to the gentleman, so she decided to tell the Duke the truth and continue to strive only for the truth, and so that Hugh would no longer be subjected to violence and unfair treatment. However, the teacher did not want to give up so easily, because with a terrible smile and confusion, he began to shout that everything was not so, and in fact, the truth was on his side, because he was a professional teacher sent by the emperor who had authority. But when the teacher wanted to prove to the Duke that everything was wrong, and Hugh lacked common sense because of his age, everything around suddenly became icy and frostbitten, as if a blizzard had suddenly started in the room. But that was the great magic of the angry Duke. This surprised the main character so much that she did not move from her place and began to examine everything with surprise, which the teacher did as well, no longer trying to prove his false rightness, because the cold magic of the aristocrat does not mean anything good for him. Meanwhile, the gentleman himself rose from his knees and stood up right before the eyes of the surprised Hugh, and was about to straighten up in order to approach the teacher and deal with him, standing in front of the frightened, red-haired man with his mouth full, which looked even more frightening. The Duke first of all menacingly asked the teacher if he had said everything, as if now the teacher had no authority for the gentleman. And when the teacher wanted to move from the spot in order to escape from the angry aristocrats, he could not even move his legs, because little Wilbert also activated his magic, causing a snowflake to appear in his hand, and he asked the scoundrel where he planned to run. After the teacher was immobilized, causing him to scream and beg the master to have mercy on him, the Duke suddenly grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up, asking if he was ready to quit his job and never return to it again. With one wave of his hand, the Duke sent the professor flying out of the office into the corridor, where the frightened man saw a tall, angry man standing in front of him, telling him to leave and never come back. And when the teacher ran away from the palace as fast as he could, the heroine looked at him and realized with surprise that the Duke was freezing everyone with his magic, including both enemies and allies, which made him terrifying. But what surprised her even more was that the one she thought badly of came up to her and no longer looked intimidating, because he bowed before her and thanked her for her help, which left the lady speechless. Sometime after this strange and sudden event, the Duke and Elsa, as befits a bride and groom, were already going to legalize their marriage, because the main character was already in front of the doors of the hall in a beautiful dress, while behind her were two girls. The lady smiled with some artificiality when she remembered that 3 days had passed since the Duke had appeared in the house, and during that time they had not even seen each other, although now they would become husband and wife, which made Madame a little nervous. But this was not the only important news that the lady knew, because she also remembered that today the polar night begins, and for the empires and great duchies that worship the sun, this is an unlucky event that weakens the power of the star god. However, she also imagined the symbol of the moon, thinking that according to others in the Grand Duchy, polar nights can last for months. And on the day of her birth and the death of her mother, it was said that there was the longest polar night in history. Having thought over all the most important things, the girl saw that the doors in front of her opened slightly and she saw a long, carpeted path, and the Duke at its end, who was waiting for his bride, which was what the witnesses of the magical event sitting in the church were doing. And the Duke himself was dressed as expected, in an exquisite aristocratic robe with a precious brooch and patterns, in which he looked at Elsa and waited for her to dare to come to meet him. However, as soon as she took even one step, the magic miraculously lifted her into the air, causing the girl to squeal, looking at everyone around her in shock as her white and red dress shone and also flew up. The lady flew right up to the Duke, who seemed not at all surprised by such an event, because magic is the most ordinary thing for him, and the protagonist at that time looked at him as if she were a real flying fairy. With her red eyes, the madam looked at the groom and thought that she could never even imagine that she would look down on such a high-ranking person, and all thanks to amazing magic. But when she looked into the face of the calm and, it seemed, angrier than usual Duke, the heroine did not understand why she had to make such a bright performance at the wedding ceremony, if the Duke did not even smile. Even when the guy took the lady by the hand, Elsa was surprised, because she looked at the many scars on his pale palm, which amazed her even more, especially since this same man is her legal husband, the Grand Duke. And the main character allowed the aristocrat to take her by both hands, thereby helping her to fall to the ground, which looked even more magical and fabulous than what the lady had previously imagined in her head. After this, a priest appeared before the couple, reading the text of the wedding and asking the couple if they were ready to be together in sickness and in health, and if they were ready to live together for life, addressing Duke Rolf and Duchess Elsha. And after this, as the couple confidently told the officiant that they both vowed to be a shining sun together, the spectators began to smile and clap their hands with joy, while the husband and wife continued to stand quietly before the priest, who also congratulated them. Also sitting in the hall as spectators were Wilbert and Hugh, who silently looked at the couple and understood that now something would change in their lives if the adoptive father had a legal wife. An interesting woman with sincerity and kindness. And the protagonist herself at that time, it seems, was already sleepy and tired because she could close her eyes at any moment. But she still thought that when she looks at such a large-scale event, she completely forgets about the polar night, an important event. She also looked at the angry Duke, who was silent and seemed to be waiting for the event to end, while his bride was thinking that after all the formalities, she would finally be able to talk to her husband in a calm environment. But as it turned out, in reality, a slightly different situation awaited the girl, because in the evening she was in a dark bedroom with the Duke, or rather, she was on top of him, while the aristocrat himself was lying on the bed. And Duke Rolf looked at the blonde with red eyes and a sweet face, who looked at him and blushed, as if from embarrassment, but still knew perfectly well that after the wedding there is also a wedding night. But everything turned out to be not so simple. But the nobleman looked at her with such surprised eyes that it seemed he could immediately lose the gift of speech. But he still quietly asked the lady what she was doing, as if he was not thinking at all about intimacy with her. And when the guy asked the girl what exactly she was doing, the lady blushed even more, not even knowing what to answer, which is why a feigned, shy smile appeared on her face, because as it turned out, her fiancé did not even think about intimacy. But a couple of hours ago, after this strange event, when the lady did not even suspect what would happen next, the white-haired lady sat on the bed and sadly waited for the moment when the Duke would enter the bedroom. This is what happened, because she immediately turned her head towards the door when she heard and saw Rolf, who was opening the door with his hand and was already looking at his wife, getting ready to come closer to her. He didn't say anything and didn't even greet the lady, which only indicated that they still had to get to know each other and become closer, because he simply stood in front of her and began to examine her face, which caused goosebumps to run across the lady's skin. After a few minutes of awkward silence, when the protagonist became even more awkward, the lady in the light nightgown wanted to be the first to break the silence, and therefore thanked the aristocrat for something as a courtesy. However, the guy in front of her just sighed and told the girl that she had no need to thank him for choosing her as his wife, because in fact it was just an order from the emperor, which he had carried out. But even without that, he was ready to provide her with all the comfortable conditions in the palace. But this surprised the main character even more. Then she looked at her husband with different eyes and parted lips, thanking the Duke very much for such living conditions in the new house, because she did not expect to hear this from a cruel man obsessed with war and battles. That's why she smiled even when the guy honestly admitted to her that he wasn't planning on having children with her yet, to which she said that she completely agreed with that, because Wilbert and Hugh could also inherit his title. But in response, the brunette with blue eyes was silent at first, as if from confusion, and then explained to the lady that this was not the only reason, because, as it turned out, not everything is as simple as it seems. In response, the lady was surprised, still sitting on the bed and looking in amazement at the Duke, who told his wife that he wanted to warn her right away that he did not want her to expect affection and love from him, as from a real husband. And the guy's words, spoken in all seriousness, made the lady with fibroids stop smiling and look at her husband with caution. And all because the reality turned out to be not a fairy tale, and her husband was not as kind and polite as expected. Only after this, having apologized to the woman, the aristocrat turned around and wanted to turn around and leave the room so as not to disturb her anymore, having said everything that was most important and amazing for Elsha. And the girl looked thoughtfully at the bed and swore, thinking about the fact that when her newly made husband tells her such cold and cruel things, she still feels a little sick in her soul, even though she understands that nothing like this should be expected from the first days of dating. But a thought suddenly popped into her head, which made her want to shout for the Duke to stop, which the man did, assuming that the lady had something urgent to tell him. And when the guy wanted to sadly and sternly ask the lady what exactly she wanted to discuss with him, he noticed with amazement that the blonde appeared right in front of him, blocking the doorway with the aim of stopping Rolf. And the beautiful red-eyed lady looked at the Duke with indignation and anger and asked him if he treated his sons with the same indifference and severity, which was what worried the protagonist the most. Only then did the aristocrat, cold both outside and inside, look at the lady with furrowed brows, not yet intending to make excuses and as if trying to understand what was happening to his wife and what she was trying to achieve. But she still didn't let the guy pass or take even one step out of the room, because the blonde stood in the doorway with her hands raised and asked her husband whether he treated his sons with the same indifference as he did her. The boy clenched his fists and tried to tell the lady that he was merely fulfilling the duties of a foster father. But when the red-eyed lady asked if that was the reason he had irresponsibly provided Hugh with a bad and cruel tutor, the warrior became angry and wanted to object. Only after this did she begin to take the first steps towards her husband, telling the Duke that she did not want to condemn him for his actions and methods of upbringing. But the fact that his sons had neither adults nor friends on whom they could rely upset her greatly. The Duke gradually moved away from the girl and asked her with displeasure what he wanted and whether she wanted him to give them up to an orphanage if he was a bad father. But in response, the protagonist only went to him and said that upbringing is very important for every child. The aristocrat continued to ask whether the lady meant that love was also important for children, to which the red-eyed Elsha firmly replied that this was also an integral part, because in upbringing, the main thing is the environment, parents, and upbringing, as well as true happiness. And the guy did not expect at all that the previously calm and silent lady would suddenly become aggressive and dissatisfied, and even pounce on him with a request to leave his sons to her to raise if he did not love them. But the frightened Rolf, in response, only leaned away from her. Due to the unexpected moment and the clumsiness of the man himself, who also tried to grab the protagonist by the shoulder, Rolf felt that he was about to fall and therefore instinctively wanted to cling to the girl. But everything did not go according to plan, because at the moment when the girl was shouting at the aristocrat and promising him that she would give Wilbert and Hugh the best education and the finest surroundings, she felt that she was about to fall on Rolf, who in turn would crash down on the bed. Only then did the girl understand that it was all over, which was evident from her confused face with her mouth slightly open and her eyes in shock. And out of embarrassment, she did not want to say even a few words, but she was unable to do so. However, the Duke himself looked at her so seductively and charismatically that the girl became even more embarrassed and gave in to panic. But the brunette, judging by his expression, did not quite understand what the lady, who was still on him, was trying to achieve. But when the blonde couldn't believe that she had done this, she heard strange creaks and steps near the door, as if someone was definitely standing there. And so the lady turned around, which her husband hastened to do, being in complete shock. And these uninvited guests in the bedroom turned out to be Wilbert and Hugh, who looked at their parents uncertainly and did not understand what they were doing, but still stood and looked at them as if they wanted to find out something. As soon as Wilbert was the first to ask the couple what they were doing, Elsha immediately moved away from the equally surprised Duke, getting up from the bed and waving her hand away from him while he was covering his cleavage with a shirt. But when the main character and her husband wanted to find the words to explain what was happening to the children, Wilbert suddenly shouted out that he didn't care what was happening here, because he was going to do something. The thing is, he quickly and persistently approached the protagonist, took her by the wrist, and smiled terribly, offering his adoptive mother to sleep together today in the same bed, which looked as scary as possible. And while Elsha was completely shocked by the words of the little mousesick, the brunette with blue eyes behind her was just as perplexed, looking at the ceiling with thought and asking the children if they really wanted this. When the girl, in shock, tried to remember the last time someone looked at her so terrifyingly, she felt a little boy take her hand and begin to prove to her adoptive father that Elsha worked tirelessly all the time, always slept with him, and therefore she needed rest. Also, when the guy realized that his younger brother was still behind them and was standing uncertainly at the entrance to the bedroom, Wilbert decided to call him to himself, showing his palm and thereby hinting that they needed to be together if they wanted to achieve what they wanted. And Hugh, who immediately realized that he needed to act, did not just approach the adults, but collided with the main character from behind, which even made Elsha stagger a little, not understanding what was happening. But, as it turned out, Hugh had his own plan for them to be able to sleep together. He used his cuteness and charm as a weapon, blushing with embarrassment. But Hugh still snuggled up to his mother with the toy and wanted her to understand that this was very important to them, and that the brothers really wanted this. And the girl gave in to the boy's cuteness and therefore looked at him with admiration and delight, with shining red eyes. but she did not realize why they were doing this. Immediately after Hugh began to cry, hugging the surprised Elsa, Wilbert began to loudly and indignantly tell the also astonished Duke that his younger brother was crying, and therefore the main character should not be kicked out of the house. And besides this, they needed to sleep together, and not alone. Only at that moment did the blonde realize that it seemed the children thought that she and her husband were arguing, and therefore made an attempt to reconcile them and do everything possible to ensure that the protagonist was not kicked out. Wilbert sold the talk to Pay that Elsa was often clumsy and confused, but she was kind and sincere, and that was why he did not want her to leave. And at that time, the girl herself looked at the Duke as if peering at his reaction. And at that moment, the boy with blue eyes looked at her with such shock that it seemed he had never been so amazed, because the whole situation and the words of the children made him shut up and look at Elsa as if she were a miracle. He continued to look at his wife with a similar stunned face, telling everyone that he had never imagined that they had managed to become so close in such a short time, and only this fact surprised him to the depths of his soul. The little ones also looked at him, defending their desires with determination and courage, listening to the Duke's words that he himself did not remember the last time he saw his son so emotional and persistent. The aristocrat's words made the protagonist also feel amazed, causing a light bulb to turn on in her head as she realized that just a few days ago the children had been avoiding her and not speaking to her, but now they were insisting that she stay in their family. However, when the thoughtful Duke raised his hand to his chin and told the children that this was not all he wanted to say, everyone suddenly became silent, waiting to hear the final answer from the head of the family with such tension that only it was heard in the air. All three, that is, Elsa with Wilbert and Hugh, stood in front of the Duke sitting on the bed and waited for his word with such impatience that it seemed as if the aristocrat would not listen to his children, and therefore would still get rid of his wife, like unnecessary trash, which was a nightmare for the brothers. But what was everyone's surprise when the calm and no longer angry nobleman looked at everyone and said that he agreed that they would all sleep together today, even if the bed was cramped for 4 people. At that moment, a lightning bolt of defeat and amazement seemed to strike Elsa and Wilbert, from which they looked at the Duke with their mouths slightly open, while Hugh, it seemed, was only glad about everything that was happening, because he was smiling with happiness. Even a few minutes later, the main Agrinia could not shake off such news. With beads of sweat, a sweet smile, and excitement, she understood that the Duke had definitely said that the 4 of them would sleep together tonight, that she had definitely not disobeyed her. Understanding what the little boy had agreed to, Wilbert looked uncertainly and suspiciously at the main character and her brother, realizing that the Duke had nevertheless agreed to let the whole family sleep in one bed, which seemed to be already worrying the future heir. But the aristocrat sitting in front of him on the bed only lowered his head and said again that everything was as it was, and they had not misheard, which made everyone even more wary. And they realized that the Duke, who had previously been angry and cold to everyone, had agreed to this. However, at that moment, Rolf himself was not even thinking about how to please the children, because he looked at his wife with mistrust and dullness, believing that he could not trust her, much less leave her with the children. And when Elsa began to look at him, he asked with displeasure what was wrong. The main character decided to take the chance and express her opinion. So she looked at Hugh with uncertainty and told the Duke that she already knew that they would not be so comfortable in the same bed, and this clearly bothered her. But when the girl looked at the sweet and silent boy with a charming appearance, she suddenly realized that she would not even be capricious and make claims, because for the sake of the sweetest child, she was ready to do anything. Only after this did the lady standing next to the boy understand that all she had to do was agree with everything, and please the children who wanted love and attention after years of living alone and in alienation. And she even wanted to kneel down next to the silent boy and ask him personally if he was ready to sleep with them. But this action at first amazed the silent Hugh, who usually is never asked about anything. Only thanks to a kind and charming smile did the girl realize that the mute baby wanted and was waiting for the moment when he would hug his parents and fall asleep in such warmth and great care that he had lacked so much since early childhood. And sometime after that, when it was late evening, the main character was really in bed, when 2 boys were already lying on both her shoulders and snoring, and the protagonist looked at one of them with curiosity and surprise, because this had never happened to her before. She peered at the fry for the reason that the cuteness of the brunette with plump cheeks and long eyelashes could very quickly bewitch her, because of which, even feeling insomnia, she could not move, wanting not to wake up the children, who wanted only love and peace. The girl also looked at the no less cute and handsome Hugh with sandy light hair, who was snoring and already sleeping very soundly, which surprised the protagonist, who realized that the children were also tired and had experienced a lot of emotions in the last few days. But not everything was so sweet and charming, because next to her, on the same bed, lay the Duke, who did not seem to be going to sleep, because he leaned on one arm and in this position looked at the lady with such an intent gaze as if he suspected something and did not trust her. And this is what made the main character's dick not even move, but just lie in bed between two children, because she thought, well, it seems that this is how it should be. But she still did not understand why the black-haired aristocrat was looking at her so intently. But her thoughts about the awkward situation quickly broke through when she noticed that a small boy named Wilbert began to roll around in bed and talk even in his sleep to someone, saying that he did not want Elsa to be kicked out of the palace. The lady realized that her eldest son was thinking about her literally without interruption. This touched the lady so much that she raised herself a little from her bed and began to look at her adopted son with sadness and tears in her eyes, thinking that he was much more worried about her than she had previously assumed. But behind her, the girl had already heard the brunette rise from the bed and thoughtfully say that he had already understood what was needed to pacify and calm such a restless little boy as Wilbert, who had always had a difficult character. The Duke's words made the lady turn to him angrily and say that he needed to carefully choose his words and actions, because Wilbert was not an easy boy who was trying to grow up quickly and become a worthy aristocrat. But despite everything, he was still a child. However, the girl's words made the brunette see something evil and cold in her harmless and truthful statements, which is why he himself looked at her angrily, asking Elsa in a rough voice whether she was hinting that he didn't care about the children at all. And the voice of the aristocrat made the girl shudder on the spot, feel goosebumps on her skin from the stern voice of her husband, who could get angry at any moment and talk to his wife as if she were his most sworn enemy, whom he trusted the least. She decided to answer Rolf just as angrily, saying that she now understood why the children were constantly feeling anxious, being exposed to the cold from the Duke. But after that, the man only turned over to sleep on his other side, which is why the lady looked at him and fell silent. After that, everyone fell silent, and the main character also decided to go to bed, turning her back to the Duke and trying to fall asleep quickly. But the thoughts in her head were louder, which is why sleep does not come to her right away. The thing is that the patient was shaking with fear when she remembered her husband's cold eyes and his glances, in which the girl saw only that he truly hated her and was ready to do the most terrible things to her if he did something wrong. But she had no idea that at the same time the Duke was also awake, thinking about the fact that he had married Elsa not of his own free will, but by order of the Emperor, which is why they could not have a full-fledged relationship based on love, which the protagonist was also thinking about. And the thoughts of the aristocrat became deeper and deeper, and because of the memories of the Emperor who interfered in his personal life, and not only in his work, he remembered when he himself was kneeling before him, and the great ruler held a golden goblet of wine in his hands. He remembered that very moment when he found himself before the Emperor with a golden crown and long hair, when he solemnly told him that he had decided on his future wife, and therefore he wanted to tell him such wonderful news. The Emperor, showing Duke Rolf his contented smile and also lazily tilting his head to the side, asked his subordinate whether he had already decided where he would celebrate his marriage and whether he would like to celebrate the event on the border with a neighboring country. But the dark-haired Duke looked at the Emperor with surprise and was amazed first of all by the fact that he had a bride at all. So he answered with slight confusion that after a long expedition, he wanted to spend time on his own territory. Imagine the aristocrat's surprise when the glass from which the Emperor was drinking wine flew straight into his face and thus spilled, while the ruler himself was shouting at his subordinate, asking why he was not obeying his orders. Only after this did the Duke fall silent and simply ask the Emperor for forgiveness for his words, deciding to come to terms with his situation, which is why Emperor Adler also fell silent, as if from the warrior's satisfactory answer. The nobleman remembered all this even while he was in bed, and because of that, he became angry, frowned, and wanted to quickly take revenge on the Emperor, or at least throw his anger out. Biting his lip, he recalled all the most terrible and unpleasant events in his difficult life. But the Emperor angered him the most, which is why he could not sleep, and anxiety seemed about to fill his soul and turn into rage. Unable to bear it, the Duke decided to turn to his children and wife, looking at them and watching how everyone was already asleep. But the aristocrat was only interested in Elsa, who had appeared in his life so suddenly that he still could not get used to her. He sat up from the bed, trying to look more and more at the sweet and beautiful, bright appearance of the main character, who seemed to glow in the moonlight, like a real princess. But he had no intention of admiring her beauty, because he saw her as a problem and a hindrance, which was why his large, deeply scarred hand could at some point squeeze her fragile neck. When no one suspected what Rolf really wanted to do, the man looked at his wife, whom he hated and did not trust, trying to find the strength to squeeze her hand and thereby hurt the heroine. And as soon as he squeezed his hand even a little, the main character's face turned red, and she herself clearly showed uncomfortable emotions. And the aristocrat at that time thought that the girl was truly defenseless and weak. Only after this did the stern brunette stop touching the protagonist's neck, because he thought that if he squeezed his hand even a little, he would definitely break her neck. But this did not cause him any more feelings except anger and irritation. But what surprised him even more was that his youngest son suddenly turned over onto his other side towards his mother to hug Elsha and sleep with her, which seemed to indicate that even the children cared about her and did not want to lose her. Wilbert also slept soundly and snored, not even suspecting that in fact the Duke felt only contempt and mistrust towards the main character, which is why he was thinking about not rushing to open up to Elsha, but continuing to show her the cold. At this moment, when there was only darkness around their bed, and the nobleman himself was looking at the sleeping lady, he was thinking that if Elsha was a spy sent by the Emperor, he would be able to find out. But the fact that he was a bad father was an indisputable fact, with which he agreed. He continued to look at the children, covering them with a blanket warmer and thinking about the fact that he was also a bad duke, and thoughts about this made him remember the past. Or rather, his father, who, on the contrary, had real happiness, inseparable from anything. He still remembers his dad laughing with his beloved woman, enjoying the fresh air near the open window, when his wife joyfully held little Rolf in her arms, who stretched out his hands to his mother. And at that moment, the little Duke was truly happy, laughing out loud in the arms of his golden-haired mother, who, in turn, told her beloved husband a variety of things, which even made Rolf's father laugh, sincerely loving his son and wife. And so the long, difficult night passed for everyone, and when the morning came, the white-haired main character just looked at the ceiling with sleepy eyes, while her sons, who, on the contrary, had managed to get enough sleep, were still sleeping on both her shoulders. And the girl had to remove Wilbert's legs from herself, realizing only that she didn't even feel like she was sleeping. But she didn't want to lie in bed anymore. So the lady hurried to get out of bed before everyone else. Having put slippers on her feet, the blonde began to walk sluggishly around the room and touch her head from a slight migraine after insomnia, and then sneezed, which indicates that it is cold and she needs to get dressed quickly, and not stand in a light nightgown in a cold room. And after a while, the girl was already climbing the stairs in a long, purple, modest dress, thinking about the most important things and no longer feeling the cold and discomfort, because there was a thick layer of hay outside. But as soon as she heard strange sounds from the bedroom, or rather Wilbert's scream, where he tried to call the main character by name, Elsha immediately looked at the door of the room and realized that she needed to run to them, to calm the children, who probably already believed that she had left their house. Taking the train of her dress in her hands, the blonde walked quickly to the door, thinking that her sons might well get upset when they didn't see her in bed, if they had already been fighting with the Duke for the lady's right to stay in the house. Her pale hand touched the door handle, and the lady was already preparing to open the door to be sure to see the worried kids who did not understand where Elsha wanted to go. But the heroine was already preparing to calm them down. And the first thing the girl noticed in the bedroom was Rolf, who was shocked and got up from his bed, who was stretching out his hand to the little child and trying to prove to him that he had not kicked Elsa out of the palace. But Wilbert did not believe his dad. And the guy himself was so angry and worried that, trying to run towards the door, probably with the intention of running out of the room and looking for the heroine, he himself did not notice Elsha in front of him, which is why he crashed into her with all his might. He received a blow to the head and did not even have time to say a word when the Duke immediately took him by the shoulders and pulled him away from the lady, remaining silent in front of the protagonist out of shock and surprise. And also, when the main character looked at him with obvious distrust and contempt, which hinted that he shouldn't try to grab the children with his strong hands, the aristocrat let go of Wilbert and didn't want to hold him anymore. In front of the lady, there was a handsome but emotionally modest guy who looked at her with blue eyes and wished her good morning in a polite, low voice, which, it would seem, could pleasantly surprise any lady. And Elsha was no exception, because the blonde looked into his eyes with such defeat, as if she was seeing him in front of her for the first time. but she was even more amazed by the fact that the Duke called her Miss, which helped her understand that the aristocrat recognized her as the legal mother and wife of the children. Wilbert also noticed this, and immediately blushed from the realization that the Duke would still call Elsa mistress, although he had no idea that in fact the aristocrat had more mistrust than respect for her. After that, there was an awkward silence as Rolf looked at the protagonist and didn't understand what to do next. But then he realized that he needed to thank the sweet woman for her kindness and care for the children. And then he looked at the lady again with firmness and calmness, thanking her for her constant support of his sons, and also informing her that he would be glad to see her not only as a duchess, but also as the mother of his children. This amazed Elsa even more, who did not expect to hear even a couple of kind words from the cold man. And while she looked at him with red eyes in surprise, Hugh and Wilbert around them laughed with joy. But the lady decided to show the Duke her courtesy in the same way. So she made a sweet curtsy and told him that she was no less glad that he allowed her to stay in the palace and that it was a real honor for her. That turned out to be not all, because the guy stood in front of the main character like a soldier, telling everyone that for now they needed to discuss the rules by which they would live. And the lady was interested in her husband's words, which is why she asked what he meant. The artist began his story by saying that since they married by order of the emperor and know nothing about each other, it could have a bad effect on their relationship. And this also applies to the children, Hugh and Wilbert, who need to be raised. And the brunette with his eyes closed said that since they were from different regions, they needed to immediately resolve all necessary issues so that conflicts would not arise later, and they could live peacefully with each other. In fact, the Duke wanted to get to know his wife better and find out if she was a real spy. And while the lady was thinking in response that she agreed that they needed to get to know each other better, she was surprised to hear someone's stomach rumble from hunger. When everyone said in unison that the rumbling definitely came from them, they noticed that little Hugh began to smile and blush and touch his tummy, but he did not dare even look at the others and hint that he wanted to have breakfast. The blonde quickly realized that the child would not be able to tell everyone about his desire to eat. So with a smile, she decided to do it herself, raising her hand and telling everyone that it was her stomach that was growling and she would not mind having breakfast right now. And the Duke liked the idea of the main character, which made him smile sweetly but modestly, looking at each member of the family and telling everyone that they really should go to the dining room and replenish their strength. As the aristocrat said, all the family members went to the long table, on which there was not only a white tablecloth, but also various dishes, jams with the most unusual flavors, also bread as an appetizer, and the large dish on the table was a roll, it seems, meat. The Duke sat at the table and ate his food in silence, while little Hugh sat next to him and also enjoyed his food. And opposite them, near Wilbert, sat Elsa, who was cutting food with a knife and thinking about her own things. Wiping the excess food from his lips with a white napkin, the Duke decided to be the first to break the silence and ask each of them if they wanted to continue the same conversation about what he had discussed earlier, hinting that they needed to get to know each other more. The white-haired beauty smiled, looking at Wilbert and telling the aristocrat that this could be done. And the sweet woman looked at the little boy who was disgusted by the fish and meat on his plate. The red-eyed lady continued to look at Wilbert and understand that there were many things that the brunette did not like, and therefore she wanted to get to know him better as soon as possible in order to find out what else irritated him. Aristote wanted to tell everyone that he also wanted to establish rules in the house, and the lady wanted to be the first to speak out about it, waving her hands and telling her husband that she would like to improve the situation in the house, which made Rolf look at her and ask if she was cold, and the lady replied that she was a little cold. At that moment, the gentleman looked at her as if he had realized something in his thoughts, but he didn't say anything about it, because he couldn't even say a word. Immediately after the lady sneezed at the table, the butler Toman came up to her and gave her a blanket, looking at her with a smile and telling everyone that Elsa grew up in a warm, different climate and in a different region, so she might not like the new, cold conditions, even if the palace was heated with magic. The aristocrat with short black hair looked at the girl and said that in that case it would be best to prepare clothes and other things so that the girl would be more comfortable in the castle and on the street. Suddenly, Wilbert intervened in the conversation, who with a sly smile told everyone that it would be nice to choose clothes for the mother together, and the boy's idea surprised the white-haired lady, who did not expect that everything would turn out this way. Meanwhile, Rolf was looking at Hugh, who was sitting next to him, and although he couldn't speak, he still raised his hand and nodded his head happily, thereby saying that he also really liked the idea of choosing outfits for Elsa. After coughing a little, the black-haired boy decided to be cunning and persuade the Duke to buy the woman clothes, telling her that Elsa, who grew up in a different climate, did not have the right clothes or even bad ones, and therefore he wanted to offer an even more tempting idea. And the main character realized that she was increasingly unable to keep the situation under control. Because even now, Wilbur looked at the Duke with delight and told him that he could choose clothes for the protagonist himself, which surprised Rolf himself. However, after some time, when the girl remembered herself that time when she first came to the palace in a chic pink and white dress with snow-white fur, the lady realized that her children and husband might form the wrong opinion about her images. She told everyone with indignation on her face that the way they saw her the first time was a false impression, because she did not choose the clothes, but only wore what her stepmother liked, who had previously ordered these clothes from a famous designer. And when the children were surprised by this turn of events, the Duke simply closed his eyes and raised his cup to his face, telling the Duchess that everything was clear to him in a thoughtful and calm voice. The guy with black hair told everyone that he had decided on the minimum rules and therefore they could already go to the city for shopping, and the protagonist listened to all the words of the aristocrat in silence, surprised by what was happening. After some time, the couple with the children actually left the palace for the city, which was covered with a thick layer of snow, which was visible even from afar because the roofs were white, and golden lanterns shone on the streets, adding to the winter mood. And the family itself was already in a cozy and not cheap clothing store, where they could both buy ready-made dresses and order them to size, because the emblem of the stall depicted an elegant-looking lady with a hat and in a fluffy dress. Already in it, the blonde looked at herself in the mirror with shock and an open mouth, because she was wearing a gorgeous red rose-like dress with a designer hat. And when behind her an employee helped Elsa get dressed, the girl was more and more surprised by the images. However, the Duke was even more shocked by this, as he watched all the transformations of his wife and watched with amazement at the children, who were happy to see their mother beautiful and well-groomed, which corresponded to her majestic status as a duchess. Wilbert told the girl with embarrassment that she really looked very beautiful and charming, which is why the smiling and inspired girl looked at the Duke and asked him to praise her for trying on everything, without exception. And the aristat decided to have his say, looked at the lady in the red dress, and told her that for the first time, when they were choosing outfits quite quickly, these options were not bad. But Wilbert and Hugh were not satisfied with the option of choosing outfits and leaving as quickly as possible. And so they looked at their parents with enthusiasm, smiling and saying that they needed even more looks for their mother, because she was a true mistress. And so, at the request of her little sons, the blonde soon began to try on new dresses. For example, a dark blue one with beautiful patterns, which suited her even better. But unlike the first one, it was restrained and minimalistic. But the main character only started smiling when she tried on a snow-white coat with thick fur, which also came with a fur hat, which the lady touched with her hands with a smile and admiration. She noticed that the Duke had no plans to finish trying on the images, but only ordered the servants to find new dresses. And when the protagonist was indignant, saying how much longer she had to stand and look at herself in the mirror, she remembered Rolf with a cup of tea in his hands, who said that they were going to the city not for dresses, but to get to know each other better. Elsa even looked to the side and realized that she had a lot of work to do, because the stand was filled with a variety of dresses and boxes, like gifts, in which her new, exquisite clothes were located. The lady with the white cap and red eyes sighed tiredly and realized that the Duke had bought her so many dresses that she would have enough to wear something new every day for a month without repeating herself. And only this realization shocked her. But as soon as she felt that someone was touching her dress, as if trying to attract attention, the girl turned around and saw before her eyes a luxurious pink dress, as if for a princess, which the servant was holding with a smile, hinting to try it on too. And this person who so wanted to show her luxury in the form of clothes turned out to be little Hugh, who, although he could not speak, smiled at her and pointed his finger at the image that he liked no less than others. However, everything turned out to be not so simple, because when Elsa was about to try on the new option, she heard Wilbert's voice telling everyone to look at it, because he had found something better, which everyone did, including the employees in the store. The thing is that the brunette with blue eyes pointed to Timon, a purple dress, and told everyone with delight that if the main character wears it, she will definitely turn into a princess, incomparable to anyone. And the aristocrat quickly realized that because of her sons, the main character was in a difficult situation, because each of the boys pulled Elsha's hand in different directions with the intention of quickly persuading the lady to try on their versions of dresses. Only after that did the guys stop arguing and let the protagonist go, thanks to which she sighed with relief, thinking that she would not have to choose anything. But while she was thinking about it, she did not notice how the Duke came closer to her. She fell silent when the nobleman with a stern expression told everyone that they would not try on all of it, but would simply buy it all at once, which left the heroine silently surprised. Elsha was shocked by the Duke's decision, and therefore asked if he was telling the truth. But at that time, Wilbert and Hugh clapped their hands with happiness and understanding that they were able to achieve what they wanted thanks to their father's compromise. The lady stood next to the tall and stern Duke and asked him if they bought all the dresses they chose. When would he even suggest she wear them? To which the aristocrat coldly replied that he didn't want to hear anything else, and that this was his final decision. The red-eyed lady looked at the Duke with uncertainty and caution when he told her about a certain first rule in their relationship, which states that he recognizes her as his wife and Grand Duchess. Therefore, they must communicate with each other as much as possible and respect each other's opinions. The black-haired guy looked at her with blue eyes and told her that since she became his wife and Duchess, she also had responsibilities, for example, to properly manage the affairs of the house, thanks to which he would have more time to attend meetings. And then the girl with closed eyes understood that now she would have to play the role of the mistress of the house. The Duke looked at her and was amazed at her financial literacy, because for the Duchess, this is a great rarity. As if she were a simpleton who did not want to spend a lot of money on jewelry and outfits. He was thinking that she really had very unusual behavior, that she was special in this. But the Duke's intense gaze attracted the blonde's attention, which made her look at him with interested, red eyes, asking what was wrong. At first, the man was surprised, which was evident from his confusion and surprised eyes. But he quickly came to his senses and turned away from the lady, slightly lowering his head and telling her that everything was fine, although he had to hide his interest in her with great difficulty. But when the guy said that next time he would go with them to choose headwear for the lady, Elsha was surprised to the point of speechlessness, and the brothers were delighted and jumped up and down because they like adventures in the city the most. And after a few hours, the couple actually bought a large number of hats with different colors and decorations, seemingly for all occasions, which the lady was delighted with and returned home in a good mood. Like a real family, Wilbert, together with his brother, walked ahead and laughed when Elsha and Rolf couldn't keep up with them, and the girl extended her hand to them, trying to catch up, while the aristocrat remained silent and behaved with restraint. And so the evening came in the shining, snow-covered city, where the family spent a lot of time, until the moment when bright stars began to appear in the dark sky, sometimes disappearing from behind the clouds. Already in the private mansion, the main character walked down the corridor in a snow-white dress with blue shades and sighed tiredly, thinking that she had never imagined that trying on dresses would exhaust her so much that she would dream of dinner with a soft bed. Sometimes she looked at the columns, the various ornaments in the castle's architecture, thinking that she had been very tired lately, but she had managed to get a separate room, thanks to which she could be alone and enjoy the silence. She also looked at the ceiling with a smile, remembering the second rule that her husband had told her, that she could sleep with the children in the same bed if they wanted to, and that once a week they should sleep in the marital bedroom to discuss reports together. However, as soon as she opened the door with thoughts of rest, she noticed her not-so-favorite sister in her own bedroom, who ominously turned to her and said with a smile that this time her favorite sister came late, because she was waiting for her. The blonde immediately stopped near the entrance to the room and asked her sister in surprise what she was doing there, but her younger sister only smiled, showing her her exquisite peach dress which her mother had probably chosen for her. Only a minute later, Karen turned around and walked around the room, telling the surprised Elsha that at first she was placed in the living room. But when she realized that her sister was late, she decided to go straight to her room, which, according to Karen, turned out to be cramped and ugly. And when the white-haired beauty wanted to tell her younger sister that she didn't mean it that way, Karen had already managed to approach her new dresses to look at them closer and tell Elsha that she had good taste. However, when the girl wanted to touch one of the dresses with her hand, because she considered them incredibly beautiful and expensive, Elsha suddenly blocked her way with an outstretched hand and ordered her not to touch her things, which outraged the spoiled Mestra. The girl in the peach dress wanted to ask her sister why she forbade her to touch things, to which the lady with white hair and an outstretched hand sternly told her that all these were gifts from the Duke, and they were not in their house. But here everything was different, and it was unethical to behave like that. Looking at the frozen window, on which the frost had drawn beautiful patterns, the Duchess told her sister that she had been sent here by force, especially to a remote place, and therefore now she did not understand why she needed to appear here. And when Karen said with feigned regret that everyone at home was worried about her, so she was sent here to check on her, the blonde did not believe her younger sister's words. It seemed to outrage her, which was evident on her face. The girls talked a little about the rumors that the Duke had ignored her for a month, but this only made Elsa even more angry, who kept glancing at the girl, turning around and looking at a certain vase on the table, asking her sister if she was taking the magic tonic. The protagonist looked at the magic tonic, some kind of vessel with purple balls inside, thinking about how she was told to drink this potion right after the wedding, and all because she was supposedly not fit for the Grand Duke on the day. The blonde with beautiful eyes looked at her sister and told her that she was taking the magic tonic correctly, but she still couldn't see any effect from it. She was waiting for it to start working, but she still didn't understand what was supposed to happen. But in response, Karen only laughed at Elsa and told her to be strong and endure everything that was happening, because if she became a burden for the Grand Duke's family, she would have nowhere else to go. She would become a real loser. The white-haired lady continued to defend her dresses and stand in front of Karen, asking her if she had come here to make fun of her, to which a smiling Karen replied that it was not so, although her joy betrayed the real motive of her arrival. As it turned out, the girl with peach hair wanted to look at her sister with sweet and charming eyes in order to ask Elsa for money for herself in an equally gentle and kind voice, which shocked the lady. The blonde was surprised, looking at her sister with bewilderment and asking her why she didn't ask her father or mother for money, because they were dukes, and she didn't believe that they could ever run out of money. But in response, Karen got really angry. Being a real spoiled child who was always used to getting what she wanted, Karen, without remorse, picked up Elsa's jewelry box and threw it towards the protagonist, causing it to open and all the jewelry to fall out with a ringing sound. The main character noticed very well that all her jewelry, including pearl necklaces, diamond earrings, and bracelets, fell to the floor, and some jewelry even crumbled into pieces, into small balls, which would be difficult not only to collect, but also to fix. Elsa couldn't utter a word from shock and therefore stood in front of her sister, like a pillar, looking at her with her mouth open, while Karen herself explained to the heroine that she was currently having problems and that she incredibly needed funds. Trying to convince her sister, telling her about her loving family and that they were related, Karen began to smile slyly at Elsa and order her to hand over the money, because they love each other, and therefore should support each other, like in a real family. Only from her sister's last word did the white-haired lady begin to shake with aggression and anger, and she clenched her hands into fists, thinking about how, since childhood, she had tried to become a member of this family, but in the end, she became what is called superfluous, a burden. And because of this, the first thing the lady remembered was a terrible moment from her childhood, when she entered her room with a sad expression on her face and a book in her hands, and her stepmother and Karen were already in her bedroom, admiring the dress and, it would seem, not doing anything bad. But the main character, noticing that her stepmother had touched the dress of her own and deceased mother, ran to her with her hand outstretched in order to try to protect at least that memorable thing that was left to her from her beloved mother. As soon as she ran up, her stepmother quickly pushed her back with her hand with such force that the blonde was about to fall to the floor, leveling her book with a crash. Raising her head to her stepmother and Karen, she noticed their arrogant faces and even the indifferent smile on her younger sister's face when the woman in dark told Elsa that these were the things of the Duke of Sonneberg, that is, her father, and therefore they had the right to touch them as a family. And the red-eyed lady didn't even have anything to say, so she looked at the women with despair and shock, realizing that she wouldn't be able to defend her own and protect the precious, memorable thing. She looked at the face of a cheerful and happy Karen, who was already preparing to try on Elsa's mother's dress, and therefore danced with it in her arms, telling her sister that she would definitely try it on herself and take it. And with such joy, the girl left the room with her mother, talking about new jewelry that could be bought to go with the dress, while behind them the blonde sat on the floor as if in complete devastation. Only at that moment did the blonde realize that she was not the favorite daughter in the family, because Karen's stepmother and her father were ready to do anything for her, even take away the eldest daughter's favorite and precious things, as if she were now a pet and not a person. And now, when the main character stands near her outfits with devastation and sadness, she listens to Karen's calm words, saying that to start with, she will only need 10 gold coins, and then she will decide how much more she needs from her older sister. But everything turned out to be not so simple. Karen got angry and frowned, looking at Elsa, who in response told her that she would not give her anything. And of course, the youngest daughter did not like the words, and she seemed to see in the protagonist only a bag of money and an opportunity to get what she wanted. The girl with peach hair smiled and said that then only 5 gold coins would be enough for her. But if she didn't have even 10 coins for her, it was clear from her that the lady was not going to give up so easily. But suddenly, Karen decided to outwit her persistent and angry sister, because her hand reached out to the floor to take a certain necklace lying under her feet, saying that in that case she would take this, and not the money. Even when Elsa sternly and through clenched teeth ordered her sister not to touch the necklace, Karen smirked at her and asked if she wanted to pick up the jewel for her herself, while lifting the train of her dress with her hands. And in order to quickly make the girl do what she wanted, the lady not only told her to pick up the jewelry, but also decided to press the jewelry with her foot, which is why it began to crack under her expensive light-colored shoe with a pink bow. Hearing the terrible sound of the luxurious item finally breaking apart, the white-haired lady with red eyes looked at her sister with shock and anxiety, not believing that she was willing to do such a thing against her. But Karen seemed not to understand that her sister was feeling bad, and maybe she even liked it, because she smiled and looked at Elsa, asking her what she was waiting for, and as if pushing her even more towards humiliating actions. Then the main character decided to act decisively, because she approached Karen and did not hesitate to hit her in the face with such force that Karen leaned back and turned her head to the side with shock and real shock, pain in her cheek. An indignant Kane quickly turned to her sister and looked at her with defeat, asking how she dared to touch her, also feeling how her sore cheek was getting redder and turning into a red bruise, clearly showing off on her mistress's sweet face. But Elsa seemed to be confident in her actions and then looked at her sister with anger and hatred, telling her that she did not understand anything at all and that she was ready to defend her boundaries, to no longer be defenseless, as in childhood. And when Karen touched her cheek, which did not stop hurting, she looked at her sister, repeating again that these were not her property, but the things of the Grand Duke, and therefore she had no right to take them, much less break them. But the spoiled Karen did not want to hear prohibitions directed at her. When Elsa told her that the decoration she had just crushed was a gift to her from the Grand Duke, Karen became even more indignant, angrily shouting that the protagonist was still a nobody who was only lucky enough to become a duchess. To this, Elsa told the girl that, unlike her, she does not know how to use magic, but she has enough knowledge and experience. And here, unlike her home, she has a loving family, because it has smiling Wilbert and Hugh, as well as the Duke, tall and steadfast in everything. At that moment, she remembered the Duke's face when he calmly told her about the third rule in their relationship, which states that he recognizes Elsa as the mother of his sons. And he also recommends that she conduct a test with Wilbert in order to understand whether she is suitable for teaching children. And she slowly raised her necklace with her hand, remembering that if she passed a certain exam well, she would have the opportunity to teach her sons personally. And she also told Karen that the Duke was taking care of her and was ready to provide her with a job, the opportunity to be the best mother for the boys. Karen Lay couldn't say a single word, touching her wounded cheek, looking in shock at her white-haired sister, who was getting to her feet and was about to tell her sister a personal, final decision. Taking the necklace in her hands and hiding it, the red-eyed lady looked at Karen with confidence and said that she would not be able to give money and thereby help the man who insulted the Grand Duke. Hearing this, Karen clenched her teeth in anger so hard that she could no longer utter her complaints, so she could only cover her reddened cheek with her hand. After that, calling the maid, who appeared in the doorway a moment later, the blonde with beautiful eyes looked at her and ordered the servant to take her sister's luggage to the guest room, and not leave it in her bedroom as if it was now Karen's room. As soon as Karen heard Elsa's words about her personal belongings being taken to the servant's house where she would live, the heroine's younger sister became indignant and began to scream in the room, asking the heroine what right she had to humiliate her in front of everyone. But Elsa seemed to be confident in her decision and therefore looked at her sister with anger and firmness, telling her that she could not offer her anything more now. But if she wanted something else, she could offer her to go outside and not come back. Hearing this, the peach-haired girl couldn't stand it and decided to leave the room herself with clenched teeth, without saying a word, which made the main character just look at her. And Elsa could only look at her feet, because all her jewelry, a gift from the Duke, was lying on the floor, many of which were cracked and scratched, and thoughts about whether her new family was ready to accept her as an owl floated into her head. The girl began to pick up the necklaces and earrings that had fallen to the floor, sadly remembering how much they loved her here and how much Wilbert and Hugh needed her, because they were the children who gave her a chance to show kindness and thereby become better in their eyes. She remembered them, cheerful and with smiles on their faces, who probably even in such a situation picked up jewelry from the floor for her and played with them, which made the protagonist happier only because she understood that only the smiles of children could make her happy. And also the hero himself, who in appearance is a stern man with a suitcase in his hands and a dark coat, is for her not a simple warrior obsessed with war, but someone who is able to give her a good life, better than living in her native, heroic home. And the girl decided to put the jewelry in her hands to her chest, thinking with a smile that she would continue to try to do the best for them, to give warmth and care to the children, and to reveal her best side for the Duke. Rising to her feet with a box of collected jewelry in her hands, the girl thought about the fact that she needed to tell the Duke everything, and she still did not understand why Karen decided to come to her and ask for money, because her parents had never refused her anything. She was thinking that Karen might ask her for money because he was afraid to ask his parents about it, because he wanted to spend it, for example, on gambling. But her thoughts were interrupted by knocks on the door, because of which the lady shouted to the stranger to come in. And when the door opened slightly, she noticed in her room a small and uncertain, shy in everything Hugh, who looked at her with regret and sadness, as if understanding everything that had happened before. The blonde immediately began to ask the boy what he needed. And that's what happened, because of which Hugh began to depict with his hands as if he was hugging something, thanks to which the lady looking at him quickly realized that Hugh had lost his toy, a plush white otter. She leaned towards him and asked him if he wanted to find his soft toy, and from this Hugh only began to nod to the lady with approval, hinting that she had guessed everything the first time. The boy could not speak and therefore tried to tell all his thoughts to the girl with actions, saying something, and the blonde with red eyes looked at him without even blinking, peering into his every step in order to find answers to the questions. Then the boy decided to point his finger at the gifts that were behind the blonde, and because of this, the lady turned around, looking at them with incomprehension, because it is not so easy to guess what a mute son wants to tell. But Hugh helped the heroine remember a strange moment from the past, when she and her whole family were riding in a carriage to the city and were silent. But at that moment, Hugh was sleeping next to her, while he had a toy in his hands and those same boxes were nearby, thanks to which Elsa guessed that her son could have lost the toy at that moment. And the girl, determined to find Hugh's toy, rose from her knees and turned to the gifts, telling the green-eyed boy that they might have accidentally dropped the otter in her things, and therefore they needed to check all the places where the gift boxes with clothes had been. She showed Hugh her fist and smiled at him, saying that now they would go and look for the little boy's favorite toy together, so that he would not be upset or despair. But after they had gone through all the boxes but still hadn't found the thing they needed, the two of them suddenly realized that the search wouldn't be easy, and so now they were walking down the corridor tiredly, and the blonde with red eyes was telling the boy that she couldn't find the otter, also holding his hand. They both decided to go to the window and look through it at the snowy garden, thinking that there was only one place left that they needed to check, and that was the street, where it was cold. There was a thick layer of snow, and recently, it seemed, there had been a blizzard, which had only made the weather worse. And Hugh, so that the main character would not be cold, because the lady always freezes first, decided to bring her a white fur coat and quickly throw it on the shoulders of the astonished lady, who did not think that the little boy would be for her not only a charming baby, but also a gentleman. And she was so struck by his kindness that she decided to sit on his lap and hug him so tightly and sincerely that Hugh himself was surprised, feeling the warmth of a kind woman who rejoiced at the little things that were important to her. His eyes opened so wide that they sparkled with new colors, vivid and never seen before. But he himself did not move, not believing that a woman could hug him like her own child, for such a seemingly simple action. And Elsa herself almost cried at that time, thinking about how she had previously believed that Hugh and Wilbert were different not only in appearance, but also in character. But now she is sure that they both have kind souls, and are also very smart children who care about those who are dear to them. And so, after some time, the lady decided to go out on the street in a white fur coat, looking at the snowy road and thinking about where Hugh's toy could be. And she also hoped that she would help the boy learn to speak, although she does not know what is needed for this, and this makes her very sad, Hugh also followed her, putting on warm clothes and wanted to find the otter with the lady. But the lady showed him her hand and thus told him to stay put, because it was very cold and he could catch a cold just as easily as not noticing it. But immediately after that, a frightened Hugh watched as the main character, without checking the depth of the snow, wanted to take the first step. But only because of him, she fell head first, preparing to fall into a deep snowdrift. A worried Hugh immediately ran up to her, stretching out his hands to his mother and wanting to help her as soon as possible. But the protagonist herself, who was laughing and holding her hat on her head, being completely covered in snow, said that everything was fine. However, it was precisely because of the sudden fall that the girl was able to see a snowman not far from her and Hugh, a figurine completely covered in snow in the shape of some cute animal. And this immediately helped the girl understand that the figurine could be what they had been looking for so long. And as the girl had expected, they saw Hugh's soft toy in the snow, which had already managed to be covered with snow, because of which it would definitely not have been possible to unsee the object right away. But thanks to a lucky chance and a fall, mother and son managed to find what they wanted. After some time, the happy child, together with Elsha, were already in the palace and were again walking along the corridor with high, snow-covered and frozen windows, in which one could see the snow slowly falling from the sky. The lady gradually took off her white fur coat, also stained with snow, but she laughed at Hugh and said that she was very glad that they managed to find his toy, which made the boy smile. But she was embarrassed by the fact that her son's toy was soaking wet from lying in the snow for several hours. And she was surprised that, having heard this, Hugh did not lose his composure and ran into the room with his soft toy, which surprised Amu, who was watching him, taking off her fur coat and hat. When she noticed out of the corner of her eye that Hugh wanted to bring his otter to the fireplace so close that it was even dangerous, the blonde decided to immediately grab him and throw him away from the hot fireplace with screams that it was dangerous, which surprised Hugh. The blonde calmed herself down and tried to calm her breathing, also holding Hugh in her arms, who seemed to be getting ready to get upset that his toy might not dry out and thus get ruined. She looked at the boy with brown hair and understood that he loved his white otter incredibly. And if she was not in her previous condition, Hugh would be very upset, because now even water was dripping from her. And the girl decided that she would make a decision to help Hugh, thanks to which in the next moment a warm light began to emanate from her hands, which was very similar to magic, because the lady was calm, trying to create an even brighter light. After this, as the lady was able to create a warm light with her own hands, she presented her enchanting palm to the boy's toy, trying to dry it, while Hugh, who had previously been sure that the lady could not use magic, looked at her in defeat. She told him that although she didn't have much magic, she could use small and almost harmless magic, which made Hugh look at her with even more shock, realizing that he too felt warmth thanks to the magical light, and his toy was drying out unnoticed. And while the main character was thinking that she had not managed to become better in magic, and that is why now the lady was trying to at least create warmth, at the same time she did not notice how Hugh hugged the toy with joy, because his toy had dried up and only become more beautiful, more alive, and, it seemed, also happy. The protagonist was very pleased to see her son's joy, so she blushed and smiled, touching her hands and thinking with a blush on her cheeks that if Hugh was delighted with something, she would only help him feel comfort and coziness more and more often. Hugh looked at her with surprise and remained silent while the lady took his hand and saw that his little fingers were frozen and red. So the lady decided to help him warm up quickly, using her powers for this. And so the girl decided to help the boy with brown hair, taking him by the hand and warming it with her magical warmth, also telling him that she was not strong in charms, although she grew up in the ducal family, but therefore she had learned ingenuity. Immediately after this, Hugh felt a warmth in his body, which warmed him more and more, which brought him pleasure and tenderness not only on the outside, but also in his soul, because parental warmth is as precious to him as a diamond. After that, the sweet boy smiled so sweetly and charmingly that for the main character, it seemed as if everything suddenly became brighter and lighter, and all thanks to the joy of his son, who was holding in his hands the already dried toy. Beautiful, and like new. After that, the lady told the child that it was time for dinner, so her son needed to take the toy to his room so as not to lose it again. But when she watched the baby running away from her, she seemed to notice something strange. The thing is that Hugh was in no hurry to run away from the woman who had been so kind to him, because he ran up to her again and began to show his palm and some gesture that the lady did not understand right away, and therefore continued to look at him with incomprehension. Elsa was silent, but smiled, looking into his eyes with interest. But the only thing she understood from his gestures was that the boy was very happy, because Hugh smiled at her with sincere eyes, holding the otter tightly in his hands. Having tried to at least pronounce words of gratitude in an unconventional way, Hugh decided to kiss the main character on the cheek with such tenderness and love that the red-eyed lady was surprised to the depths of her soul. Immediately after this, Hugh began to smile shyly and look at the girl, blushing more and more, because no one could ever have thought that a boy who was withdrawn into himself would be able to thank someone with a kiss. But for Elsa, it was so important that she, blushing just as much, and even more than her son, knelt down in front of him and bent down, thinking that this was a forbidden action. But because of this, the frightened Hugh shuddered and did not understand why the blonde was reacting like that. And even though her heart was beating much faster than usual, she still looked at Hugh and told him with a smile that everything was fine, thanking him for his concern, because he put his hand on her shoulder, not realizing that the main character's soul was simply overflowing with joy. But all the tenderness was interrupted in an instant when they both heard a strange noise in front of them, which frightened little Hugh, who immediately hid behind the lady's back, and the red-eyed lady peered ahead in bewilderment and tried to understand what had happened. Hugh immediately tried to tell the girl his feelings about what had happened, because he showed her his pale face and hands, imitating a ghost and hinting that a poltergeist lived in some room, moving objects in the evenings and at night, but the heroine was not going to be scared. She told him that ghosts do not exist and it was all a fantasy. But when she noticed that Hugh did not feel any better and the fear did not go away, she realized with a smile on her face that she needed to not just say it, but prove her case and thereby calm the child. So she decided to stroke him sweetly on the top of his head and began to tell a story about how once upon a time she really wanted a friend with whom she could play and have fun together. And the lady continued her story with a kind smile. The girl remembers how, when she was little, she wanted to play with someone and have a real friend, so she often stayed up at night until she had dark circles under her eyes, trying to meet at least a ghost. But she could not catch him and make friends with him, which the blonde told Hugh. And the lady finished her story by suddenly and enthusiastically standing up on her feet, putting her hands on the basin and telling the child that even that time the ghost did not come to her, which meant that spirits do not exist at all. This story managed to calm Hugh down a little, which made him sigh with relief, looking at the lady who at that time was turning back and was already walking in the direction where the strange sound was, telling her son that everything was fine. After a while, she was already looking at the boy with a smile and opening the door of the room, telling him that there was no one here and everything was fine. But her words were a lie, because behind her there was someone who was the cause of all the terrible creaks and noises. And this is exactly what the frightened Hugh noticed, goosebumps quickly running across his body when he saw with his own eyes that there was definitely someone standing on his mother's back, and it was not a ghost, but a real person, from which his face turned blue. As the main character was about to turn around, she did not expect to confuse the ghost with her own sister, who was already right behind her, and seemed to be walking towards her silently, which scared them both. Elsa shuddered when she saw her sister's face, no longer joyful and sweet, but devastated and scary to the point of goosebumps. But what scared the blonde even more was that the lady with peach hair looked at her without blinking, as if on purpose. She already wanted to turn to Hugh, not understanding what was happening, and she was already preparing to see how the little boy was not afraid to come closer to the protagonist and look at the stranger with anger, trying to protect his mother from Karen. Then the main character decided to speak first and showed her hand to her younger sister, telling little Hugh that this was Karen and a member of her family. But judging by Karen's face, she was the least happy to meet him. And when the girl told the boy that it was her younger sister who had come to her because she was worried, and also when the lady hinted to Karen to say hello and not to behave rudely, the girl's hand suddenly appeared in front of her, as if the lady in the peach dress had not prepared to speak to them. That wasn't all, because in Karen's hand was an ominous rose with thorny thorns, which didn't mean anything good, because the girl was going to use magic with bad intentions. From this rose, terrible, thorny branches began to appear at lightning speed, which rushed towards the frightened Elsa's face, trying to harm her or simply scare her. Because Karen no longer intends to call her sister her own, and for her, she is an enemy. Karen also ordered little Hugh not to move, which made the frightened child stand still and not even breathe, while the blonde herself looked at her sister in shock and asked her what the Lady of Thorns wanted to achieve. The girl remembered that this was the first time something like this had happened to her, even though she had endured bullying all her life. But in front of her, she really saw Karen, mad with anger, who with shocked eyes and a rose ordered her to immediately get the money and give it to her. And when the unwavering and stern Elsha asked her sister why and for what purpose she needed money, Karen bent down and covered her face with her hand, looking at the rose with madness and screaming that all this should not worry her, and she had always been a mediocrity that was not even capable of becoming something more than a disgrace. Karen continued to say that Elsha had ruined many people's plans and disappointed everyone, but the protagonist only clenched her fist and ordered her younger sister not to speak like that in front of the child. But Karen only laughed in response. She looked at Elsha with a crazy smile and said that she looked extremely funny now, because here she considers everyone a part of her new family, despite the fact that her real loved ones are alone and she abandoned them. Hearing this, Elsha again clenched her fists in anger and lowered her head down, trying to utter at least a word out of anger. But her indignation about the fact that Karen continues to remind her of her supposedly beloved family, who tried to get rid of her as quickly as possible. And while a frightened and tearful Hugh looked at his sisters, Karen continued to create a strange mania for the rose and tell the blonde that even her own father had abandoned her, and that is why she cannot experience all the happiness of a real family that she dreams of. Karen sold telling her sister that she was here only because of the Emperor's order, although in fact it was an ordinary disgrace. But at this time they did not expect that Hugh would shout out in his own voice that everything was wrong, which made the two ladies look at him in surprise. Having shocked everyone by being able to say something for the first time in his life, Karen and Elsha did not expect that the little boy stood between them, protecting his mother, causing the stunned lady with a rose in her hand to look at him with wide eyes. And while Elsha looked at the boy in shock, Hugh himself raised his hands and angrily told Karen that the protagonist was his family, for whom he was ready to do anything. And the heroine believed the child's words most of all, feeling her son's care and sincerity. But Karen wasn't shocked by Hugh speaking up because she continued to insist on her own, pointing her index finger at her sister and telling the child that if she was his family, then she was part of it, like a younger sister. But the evil Elsha didn't like it. With the same madness, Lama Posamea turned to Hugh and was about to strengthen her rose magic, telling the child that she was now in a difficult situation and needed help. But Hugh firmly told Karen that everything was wrong and she was not part of his family because she had offended Elsha, whom he was ready to protect no matter what. Unable to bear it, he even shouted at the villain that he hated her so much that he was ready to shout about it to everyone. But this did not stop Karen, who only laughed at the child's attempts to protect his mother. She told him with a smile that she too had someone to hate, admitting this before finally attacking Hugh with her thorns, which were probably poisonous and strong. Shouting at Hugh that she hated him more than he hated her, Karen caused magical branches with thorns to rush straight to the frightened Fry's face. But Hugh didn't even move, wanting to sacrifice himself for Elsha. As soon as the heroine saw the terrible branches flying towards the defenseless Hugh, the Blanalinka immediately covered the boy with her hand and told her sister angrily that if she touched the Duke's son, she would definitely get into big trouble. Karen only smiled at the lady's words because she continued to create the magic of the rose and tell her sister that she was right. But now she had some useless child and a worthless sister against her, and her child couldn't even speak normally, so she didn't even worry about not getting something. At that moment, the girl remembered the Duke and Wilbur and realized that even if she called them, they would not hear anything, because they were in the banquet hall, which was very far away and located at the other end of the building. The girl also quickly realized that Karen would not stand still, but would try to attack as soon as possible. So the lady immediately shouted that she would protect Mr. Hugh, from which she squeezed all of her sister's magical branches with her hand, causing them to weaken. And Hugh watched the lady, who, despite her bloody hand, was squeezing all the thorns of the rose so hard that they were cracking, and the protagonist herself was telling Hugh that it was her time to protect him. Hugh was shocked to hear such words from his mother, because he almost cried, looking at the girl with the hope that Lay would be able to defeat the villain and prove to her that she was only telling a lie. But at that time, Karen, confident in her powers, was already going to strike a stronger blow, which is why she raised her hand up and was already smiling, about to make her rose magic stronger in order to deal not only with her sister, but also with little Hugh. However, imagine everyone's surprise when Hugh, with just one angry cry, caused the entire room around him to freeze and become covered in pure blue ice, due to which Karen not only failed to deal with her opponents, but she herself ended up in a cage of strong, impenetrable ice. The red-eyed LMA watched in surprise as those spikes that she had previously squeezed with her hand froze and were also covered with ice, due to which even the protagonist felt frost on her face, a light layer of snow. But most of all, Karen was outraged by this, who immediately grabbed the ice bars and indignantly told everyone what kind of nonsense this was, not even believing that she had failed to defeat those who were defenseless before her and seemed to be just standing and waiting for something. Fate did not give her a chance to try to kill her sister and Hugh a second time, because by this time the Duke with Wilbert and the servants, who were all in indescribable shock, looking at the completely frozen palace, ran to Elsa and the boy. And Hugh, looking at everyone with malice while being completely covered in snow, said that he could explain and tell everything. And he also felt the cold throughout his body, which he was able to create thanks to his personal winter magic. He decided to show everyone all the events that had happened earlier in an interesting way, by creating snow figures in the form of himself, Elsa, and Kapen, who initially stood nearby. But this also greatly surprised everyone who noticed the magical figures in the air. And the boy, extending his hand upwards with which he controlled the figures, told everyone to look at the dolls and promised that with their help, he would show the truth and what had happened to them, while the others did not even suspect the danger. First of all, with the help of figures, the boy showed how he tried to protect Elsa from the evil Karen, because he stood in front of her when the villain created the magic of thorns, wanting these very branches to kill her sister and child. In conclusion, the child showed everyone how the Karen figurine soon ends up in an ice cage, where the villain is now, also telling everyone that this is exactly how it all happened. And Hugh is so sure of this that he is ready to angrily prove his innocence and the innocence of Elsa. He shouted to everyone that Kapen was a bad girl who wanted to kill him and Elsa, and the guy was holding his favorite plush animal in his hands, which it seemed was also unhappy with what was happening and was angry at Karen. The first to object to the boy was the culprit of what happened, or rather Karen, who looked at him with fury and wanted to say that everything was wrong, but she was unable to do so, because the Grand Duke looked at her, wanting to shut her mouth, and he hurried to do what he had planned, because of which the lower part of Karen's mouth was frozen so much that the lady could not even open her lips, which is why the girl felt inexorable discomfort, but could do nothing but violent twitching. Elsa also wanted to tell her sister her words, so she sternly asked her if she was offended when no one gave her the right to speak, and also if she knew what would happen next if she resisted. But unlike Elsa, who wanted to prove to Karen with words that she was wrong, the Duke decided to look at her with restrained anger and warned that if she resisted, he would freeze her nose and not even blink when the lady lost her life. Only after Kara calmed down, the butlers were able to use words to create an ice cage and free Elsa's younger sister, then grab her and take her down the corridor in an unknown direction, which made the black-haired Duke feel more at ease. But the Duke was not going to stand and remain silent because he turned to Hugh and first of all praised him for the courage and strength with which he wanted to protect Elsa from the threat, but did so without any unnecessary joy on his face. And it was so important for Hugh to hear this that he looked at his adoptive father with surprise and silence, not even believing that now he was not a quiet and shy boy, but someone who had respect in the eyes of others. Elsa also wanted to thank the boy, leaning towards him and saying this, intending not only to thank the boy with words, but also to express her love to him as much as possible. That's why she fell to her knees in front of him, and with tears in her eyes let the boy into her arms, telling him that he was the best thing she had ever seen in this life, and that she was incredibly glad that everything had turned out well and that Hugh had even spoken. The servants and the butler looked at how Elsa hugged the boy tightly and continued to talk about the best things, about how now they just needed to calm down, while a worried Wilbert was already running up to them. And Hugh was so surprised by his mother's embrace that he felt her warmth in her wide-open eyes, green and so rich, as if not only a happier life was born in them, but also new feelings of a child in his soul. After that, Wilbert also wanted to have his say, confessing to his younger brother that he was cool and therefore proud of him, which made the handsome boy with brown hair smile even more sweetly, with tears in his eyes thanking Wilbert for the compliments and recognition. And Wilbert himself was glad to tell his younger brother how strong he had become. So he smiled fleetingly and looked at Hugh with his rich blue eyes, in which there were only pleasant emotions, and most importantly, love. One of the maids also hastened to intervene in the conversation, thanked Elsa, and told everyone that she had previously looked through the gifts in the room and could not find Hugh. But when she managed to find him, she was very surprised to see such a terrible picture here. That's why now she looks at the lady with tears in her eyes and a happy smile. blessing her for not being afraid of her younger sister, but standing up to her, proving her case and protecting Wilbert and the others from such an evil person. And when the maid in front of the main character told Elsa that the Duke himself would probably be happy about such an event, the girl quickly looked to the side, and there stood the aristocrat who interested the young lady. She looked at the man, who even from a distance was tall and big, and he gradually approached her with calm steps, while Wilbert and Hugh were talking sweetly next to her and exchanging emotional words for the first time. But the Duke seemed to be worried about only one thing, because on his face, unlike the others, there were no emotions of joy or delight, pride or calm, because he was constantly thinking about how to act more correctly in situations, and whether it was necessary to now treat Elsa with disdain. And the lady, looking into the face of the stern Duke, who was calm even in this situation, even angry at something, thought that it seemed to her more than anyone else that the aristocrat was not happy about this, if you look at Rolf's face. But she did not expect at all that her gaze would attract the attention of the Duke himself, who was already heading towards her with persistence and confidence, which alerted the protagonist and made her even flinch, not understanding what to expect. As it turned out, she didn't need to be afraid because the man in front of her wanted to bow low before her first and thank her for the courage and bravery with which she wanted to protect his children from the true evil in the guise of Kappen. Rising, the kind boy with blue eyes, merciful and pure, looked at the lady and said that even if she had put Hugh in danger, it was not so bad, because only thanks to her the boy was able to speak and show his character. He also hurried to help the girl because her hand, which held the thorny branches of the rose and was badly injured because of him, still hurt. So the Duke took the lady's palm in his hand and looked at her, preparing to heal the wounds with magic. And after a few seconds, the main character felt a slight cold on her hand, which turned out to be healing, so that her wounded hand, which was wearing a torn blue glove, no longer felt pain and was completely healthy. This surprised the white-haired lady, who with red, curious eyes watched her palm, which for a few seconds was as good as new, as if she had not previously sacrificed it to save Hugh from the thorns. The girl watched the man who looked away and told Hugh that he was also glad that he was able to speak. And the first thing that surprised Elsa was that she realized that the Duke was a good father who looked not at magic, but at the development of his children. But right after that, as silence fell in the spacious and frozen corridor, the Saugs, the Duke with Elsa and Wilbert, heard someone's stomach clearly growling from severe hunger, and the main character quickly guessed that, like last time, it could be Hugh who was hungry. Hugh confessed to everyone that he was very hungry and would not mind going to the banquet hall now, which he said with a blush on his face, because he was always embarrassed to admit anything to everyone. And the Duke calmly told everyone that since they had not yet had dinner today, they needed to hurry to the banquet hall so that they could go to bed well fed, and everyone would agree with his decision, since they had not eaten for a long time. This is how the family spent the rest of the time, where the main character watched little Hugh, who was embarrassed, which was in his behavior before, but ate everything that was on the table, while chewing food with relentless speed. And the protagonist walked down the hallway with a smile, sometimes laughing, remembering the face the little boy had when he ate his food, and she was also clearly heading somewhere before going to her room and falling asleep. As the lady was talking out loud to herself about how since her little sister would no longer be in the palace, she could relax and just watch the children grow up, she suddenly noticed little Wilbert in the corridor looking out the window. The boy turned to her with a serious and rather adult expression on his face, addressing Elsa as if he had some kind of request for her, and the protagonist could not pass by him with indifference. Elsa immediately told Wilbert that he could address her less formally, and not as a mistress, due to which the calmer boy looked at her with big eyes and said that he had a conversation about Hugh that needed to be carried out right away. And the lady decided to sit on his knees with concern, asking what happened, because after the terrible events in the corridor, she was afraid that anything could happen to the boy. But Wilbert, unlike her, was calm, just standing. The boy with blue eyes confessed to Elsa that the problem was Hugh's insomnia, because even now he couldn't fall asleep, just like in the carriage where they were riding and the child couldn't sleep. So now he offers her to sleep together, which helps the family fall asleep and rest. The protagonist could not refuse Wilbert such a request, and therefore immediately extended a helping hand to him, offering to hold hands and telling him that she would definitely help them sleep as a family. However, as it turned out, the girl planned not just to take the boy by the palm, but to hug him as tightly and sincerely as Hugh, in order to calm Wilbert's worries and thereby thank him for his trust. And Wilbert himself was glad to feel with his body the warmth of a loving girl who definitely did not come to their house to get wealth or a title, but appeared with the intention of quickly showing them real care. And while the main character and the child were about to come to Hugh and support him, the boy sat on the bed and still could not fall asleep, because the loneliness and silence in the room did not please the little gentleman, who was no longer used to being alone. He even held his favorite toy in his bed, a white otter, which seemed to be kind to her this time, and therefore simply watched the sad Hugh, who did not think that they would come to him with support and love. But everything turned out to be wrong, because suddenly he heard the protagonist's voice on the other side of the door asking him if she could come in, which made Hugh immediately decide to get out of bed and approach the door with curiosity. When the door opened slightly and Elsa was glad that Mr. Hugh had not yet gone to bed, she leaned a little towards him and noticed that the boy, although he was reaching out his hand to her with curiosity and joy, could not say a word, which surprised her. And the main character with red eyes looked at Hugh with interest, realizing that most likely the boy could speak, but not right away. And shyness played the role of another barrier that did not allow the boy to speak so easily. Although the boy was smiling, his eyes shining with sweet green eyes, the girl understood that perhaps it was precisely because of shyness that Hugh was in no hurry to speak right away, but only to learn how to do so. And the grin made the lady finally calm down. Therefore, the lady did not pay any attention to the boy's silence, but instead sat down on her knees in front of him and cheerfully asked him if he wanted her to sleep with him this time, and she already knew that the child would like such an idea. However, everything turned out to be not so simple because the boy was not happy, but lowered his eyes and asked the girl hesitantly why she decided to offer her such a thing. And upon hearing this, the lady immediately realized that she had not thought of a reason for offering this to her son. Then the girl shouted to Hugh that she simply could not sleep without him because she missed him. And she also stood up, opened the door slightly, and thereby let Wilbert into the room, who fell head down when Elsa explained that he wanted to sleep with the whole family too. Indignant Wilbert immediately looked at the protagonist and said that she was lying and everything was wrong, because in fact he was ashamed to admit such charming things. But the protagonist simply turned away from him with a smirk on her face. And as soon as Wilbert raised his head with cries of indignation about the fact that he actually did not want to sleep together, because he was ashamed, his younger brother looked at him with such surprise, as if he did not expect to see him at all. Only after this did Wilbert try to get up from his bed and touch his face with his finger, looking away from embarrassment and telling everyone that he really would like to do this, because he liked sleeping together. When the main character decided to interrupt the awkward moment first, telling everyone with delight that now the three of them would sleep together, Wilbur inadvertently looked at his younger brother's face, watching his emotions and reaction. The guy saw in front of him a happy and smiling shy boy with golden hair, who was clutching his favorite toy in his hands and was only glad to see in front of him his favorite people who wished him only the best. And after a while, the family really did end up in one big room, where the blonde was smiling and looking at the ceiling while Wilbert was sleeping, and Hugh was also lying in bed with his eyes open, not yet planning to sleep. The main character was very pleased to lie in bed and think that she managed to persuade the children to sleep together, like a real family. But she also wanted to know why Hugh could not fall asleep earlier. The red-eyed lady realized that she hadn't even thought about it before, so she looked towards Hugh, who was also not sleeping, looking at him with a smile and with his thoughts about the children. The lady noticed that the green-eyed boy, like his toy, who was already asleep, was looking at her with interest, just like a baby who is interested in looking at everyone. But his attention was drawn to the protagonist for the reason that the lady has a kind heart. And the boy smiled even more sincerely, which even made him blush, making him look even more charming and beautiful. All the good LD who was able to win the children's trust and prove that she did not wish them harm. In the same way, Hugh turned his head to Wilbert, who was not sleeping, and looked at his family members with a grin, as if he was pleased even just to lie in bed and be silent, most importantly, in the company of his loving mother and brother. The main heroine was touched by the behavior of the little boys, who in her eyes were like angels, so she could look at them with rosy cheeks and wanted only to quickly express her love to them and hug them as tightly as possible. And the first one to fall into her arms was Hugh, who was shocked by what had happened, but was already reacting to Elsa's embrace with exactly the same red cheeks, and the protagonist herself was shouting at Hugh, saying that he was so cute that she couldn't control herself. The lady continued to hug the boy and, indignant at Hugh's cuteness, asked Wilbert if his brother had always been like this, while the brunette lay on the bed, leaning his elbow on his arm, watching them. He looked at her with his blue eyes and told the lady seriously that it was already clear. Because here you don't even have to think. You already know that his younger brother is the sweetest and most charming child in the world. It was with these words that the guy suddenly got out of bed and shouted that he even planned to prove it. Or rather, to do something that would help prove to Elsa that she was not mistaken, and that Hugh had been cute since birth. What surprised everyone was that immediately after this, Wilbert got out of bed and ran to some part of the house at incredible speed, causing Elsa and Hugh to look at him with shock and bewilderment. But what surprised the girl and her younger brother even more was that Wilbert didn't come with them empty-handed, because he threw a lot of books on the bed, which looked more like photo albums, which shocked the protagonist. And without wasting any time, the blue-eyed boy decided to take one of the albums in order to open it to the right page and show a photograph where little Hugh, as a baby, lifts his head on his stomach. And, according to Wilbert, in this photograph his younger brother is learning to crawl. As soon as the heroine saw this, she was immediately touched by the photo, from which her red eyes sparkled with glare, and her cheeks turned slightly red, and she honestly admitted to everyone that this was the cutest thing she had seen in recent times, maybe in her entire life. Little by little, minute by minute, the protagonist became familiar with those photographs where the little boy was learning to walk in a cute suit with a bow. And behind him Wilbert was visible, sincerely happy that his brother was making progress. It seems that the family forgot about sleep, because the main character, like Hugh and Wilbert, gathered in a circle, where the last boy enthusiastically told everyone the story of each photograph in the album, showed everything he saw, and was not embarrassed. But everything was like that until the moment when they came across an equally cute photograph, where the father was hugging a very small Hugh, who was still a baby and smiling, which surprised Elsa. Wilbert looked at this photo with a smile, telling everyone that no matter how much Hugh cried, if his father took him in his arms, he always calmed down and quickly fell asleep, in love and care. And no one noticed at first that Hugh, being a silent child, did not say a word while a tear ran down his cheek, because he suddenly remembered his dad and realized that he still missed him. Soon, the main character and Wilbert watched with amazement as Hugh instantly turned from a cheerful and sweet child into a crying fry, who was so touched by the photo with his father that tears flowed from his eyes like a river, and this made the protagonist more and more worried. The blonde with red eyes and the brunette immediately tried to find out from Hugh why he started crying, but all they got in response was the boy's trembling all over his body, and his whisper that he was apologizing to them because his mom and dad died because of him. And because of this, the child cried, bending down, and Hugh was completely sure that it was his fault, which made his heart ache. And the drops of tears were so big that they dripped onto the bed more and more. Wilbert tried to ask his brother if he blamed himself for the death of his parents all this time, to which Hugh responded with even more tears and words about how he was capricious and behaved inappropriately as a child, which is why he thinks his parents left them. The older brother also wanted to ask Hugh who told him this, and why he was sure that everything was exactly like this. And the golden-haired boy began to cry again, saying that he knew that she was to blame for everything and should have apologized earlier. At that moment, the boy imagined himself standing in front of the emperor and crying as the king looked at him with the crown on his head, and he also confessed to everyone that he was scared because he couldn't speak, which made the situation even worse. But at that terrible moment, the boy was not left alone with his problem, because the main character took him by the hand, begging the little child not to worry and especially not to blame himself for what happened, because he was still a very tiny child. The lady with white hair looked at him and asked him honestly if Hugh would fight, that he would be scolded, because of which the boy stopped crying for a moment, looking at his mother with hope, as if he saw salvation in front of him. The boy confessed to his family that he was afraid of being rejected by everyone, but suddenly he decided to speak his mind, so he told Hugh that Hugh shouldn't worry about it, which made him seem like a ray of hope in the dark room. And Wilbert himself began to cry, blushing, remembering his mother and telling Hugh that their mother had poor health, and therefore the boy was not to blame for the death of either his mother or his father. Wilbert also said that their biological mother, who has long, chestnut-colored hair braided into a braid, was really looking forward to meeting Hugh when she was pregnant, and even when she spent time with Wilbert, she sewed a toy in the form of an otter for her youngest son. And now, the brunette with short, thick hair tells Hugh that he also does not fully understand everything. But they are definitely not to blame for the death of their parents, because they were small and defenseless. As tears rolled down Wilbert's cheeks, he shouted to everyone that even if everyone was against them, he would still protect Hugh from all villains, and no one would dare to hurt his little brother. The tears of the older brother, who in Hugh's eyes was always strong and firm in everything, like a stone, surprised the little boy, because he stopped crying, looking at the other child with hope for something good. But the tears came again as he looked down and blushed, telling Wilbert that in that case he asked him to apologize for what had happened together, so that everyone would feel better. And the words of the bar made Wilbert not just hug, but pounce on Hugh with the words that he would of course apologize with him, thanks to which the little child stopped crying, surprised by the love of his family members. He blushed a little and never tired of telling him that he loved him and was ready to protect him all his life, admitting this with confidence and calmness. And Hugh was pleased to hear warm words from those people who were dear to him. That's why the boy also hugged Wilbert and cried from happiness, not daring to speak. But even without words, each understood each other's feelings, thanks to which they became even closer people. The main character, who no longer worried about the misunderstanding and sadness between the brothers, watched as they hugged sweetly in silence, realizing that every obstacle only unites them, and the hardships in life are overcome more easily, thanks to love and support. The protagonist was glad that looking through the album ended with good emotions, because of which the family slept together on the same bed. And the next day, the three of them were already sitting at a long table and calmly waiting for the Duke to arrive to start breakfast. And as they expected, a tall and broad-shouldered Duke appeared in the banquet hall, who immediately wished everyone good morning and headed to his place at the long table. But he did not suspect that his children would have some news. The first to greet Dad were a brunette with blue eyes and a golden-haired boy, who immediately stood up from their seats and, like soldiers, wished the aristocrat a good morning in the same way. And they also told Dad that they had something to talk to him about. The children asked the young man to listen to them, which is why the brunette with similar blue eyes could not help but listen to the children, who clearly wanted to tell him something important, because usually the boys did not even talk to him. And so he appeared before them, no longer intending to sit down, looking at each of the boys and asking them what had happened, while the brothers remained silent and tried to clearly say something with courage. And also near the little boys stood the main character, who folded her arms and was also preparing to hear something important and shocking from Hugh, because the golden-haired boy was trembling, trying to find the strength to start talking. The green-eyed boy bowed before Rolf and began to cry, trying to tell the adult through his tears that his father and his entire family were not returning only because of him. Hugh began his shocking story by saying that he wanted to sincerely apologize for the fact that they had no mother and father. And also, on one of the sunny days, which looked like a fairy tale, he, his father, and the Duke were called to the castle, which is why a carriage with horses came to him. On that fateful day, little Hugh, according to his story, found himself in a large red hall where the emperor's throne with a golden crown was located. But the boy in front of him burst into tears so much that he could not utter a word. Even now, little Hugh was crying, telling everyone that apparently it was only because of him that his father and even his brother lost their lives, which is why he can't breathe deeply, feeling this burden of guilt and sadness on himself. But suddenly everyone was surprised by the fact that a blue spirit unexpectedly appeared above them, and it seemed that it was the same emperor, with a nightmarish crown on his head, who wanted to frighten everyone even at home. And when everyone did not believe that they saw his face in front of them, pale, without pupils and without any emotions, Hugh, Wilbert, and the others were sure that they saw a ghost, especially little Hugh, who was afraid of them to the point of trembling in his body. But Elsa and Rolf were more surprised by the fact that it was Hugh's magic with which he had recreated the image of the emperor, a furious and cruel man who had shouted at them here, ordering them to shut their mouths. This ghost did not just appear above them, showing his terrible appearance, but he also appeared right in front of the frightened Hugh and covered his mouth, telling him with a crazy smile that if he says something unnecessary, next time his own brother will die too. Shocked but restrained in his emotions, the Duke first of all made the ghost disappear with his own magic, and then with a frown told his adopted son that all this was completely wrong and that he was not to blame. But in front of him was a boy who was still scared to the point of trembling, who could not say even a word and therefore looked at Rolf with tears in his eyes. And the aristocrat understood that he still had to prove his words. The Duke had no intention of even scolding the little boy, because with his pale hand, covered with an endless number of scars, he wanted to wipe the child's tears and kindly say that he understood that all this time Hugh had suffered from sadness and hopelessness. He knelt down in front of him and calmly said that he had never thought about this before, and that he was grateful to him for daring to tell him everything. And only after these words did Hugh stop crying, looking at his dad. Hugh finally calmed down when he noticed the kind look of his older brother, who agreed with the Duke's words that there was no reason to blame himself. And it seemed that Hugh gradually felt that his soul no longer hurt. Then he smiled himself, looking at Wilbert with the hope that they understood him and accepted him as he was, and did not condemn him, and, as the boy thought, blame him for the death of his parents, who left him for a good reason. Only after this, with the power of one hand, the black-haired Duke made the evil ghost of the Emperor dissolve into thin air and never appear again, proving to his sons that justice always wins in the world, and there is no one to fear. After that, he confidently told all the children that ghosts do not exist, and that all this is nonsense that only makes people afraid, frightened, and, among other things, feel guilty, which is why the guy clenched his hand into a fist and ordered the ghost to evaporate. And the Duke's behavior made everyone admire him and happily tell him that the Duke was really cool and that they would someday be like him, which is why the blonde with red eyes just nodded and wished that everything would be fine. And while the Lay were rejoicing and admiring the Duke's strength, the protagonist decided to look to the side and see the aristocrat who was standing not far from them, and for some reason was silent, which attracted the protagonist's attention. And the lady noticed that the black-haired Duke was silent and looked at the floor, not saying another word, which is why the girl turned to him, asking what was wrong. But suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by a curious Hugh, who began to point at something with his finger, which made Elsa look in that direction, hoping that it was not something bad that could make the children cry again and make her worry. Her red eyes looked at the window, which the child was pointing at, hoping that there was not another ghost there, capable of not only appearing, but also scaring everyone to death. But she did not think that everything turned out to be not so scary and dangerous, even the opposite. The thing is that the Duke was looking out the window with the children, asking others whether the northern lights had appeared in the sky, or if he was imagining it. But soon the heroine came up to him, trying to see the natural miracle with her own eyes. Soon the family wanted to go outside with joy, because outside the palace everything was covered with white snow, which crunched underfoot even when the blonde ran through it, holding the hand of a joyful Hugh. And the red-eyed heroine looked at the sky with surprise and defeat, asking others if it was magic. While behind her, a happy Hugh jumped and squealed with joy, feeling the comfort and coziness of his family. And at this time the Duke answered Elsa, saying that this was a natural phenomenon, which was the magic of God, which surprised the protagonist even more, who had never seen such a miracle in the sky before. Also, the children were looking at the beautiful phenomenon in the sky, or rather, Wilbert, who was shocked by what was happening. But he also managed to tell everyone that the northern lights were now clearly visible thanks to the weather, and it meant that the boys did not forget about them and sent a blessing. But the Duke himself at this time was not looking at the radiance, at the rare, natural phenomenon, and not at the children, but at the beautiful main heroine, whose snow-white hair was fluttering in the light wind and sparkling like pearls, which fascinated the aristocrat. And the red-eyed lady turned to Rolf with a smile, telling him that most likely the gods were happy that they had made peace. And the girl's words surprised the man so much that he looked at his wife, completely enchanted. Only after this did Elsa look at the sky and say that it looked incredibly beautiful and enchanting. But the Duke did not stop seeing only her beauty in the beautiful. But what everyone didn't expect was that at that very moment the main character would slip on the cold ice and squeal in fear, trying to wave her arms as if she wanted to fly. But even that didn't help her find her balance. Imagine everyone's surprise when Elsa was not allowed to fall on the ice by the Duke, who immediately picked her up in his arms and with a calm expression on his face said that it was dangerous here, which greatly surprised the main character, looking at her husband. Her red eyes became even more intense and sparkling as she looked at the aristocrat with a mesmerizing face and red cheeks and thanked him for the unusual act that she had never expected before. And the blue-eyed brunette looked at her as if he deliberately did not want to take his eyes off her, as if he were looking at a beautiful picture that had enchanted him for a moment and made him slightly surprised, even forget that he suspected her of spying. But after a while, when in complete silence the couple realized that the magical moment had most likely turned into something awkward, they looked at each other with bewilderment, and Elsa tried to hint to the guy to let her go to the ground. Having let go of the main character, the Duke in dark clothes simply turned away from the lady and walked away from her, without uttering a single word. And behind him the protagonist was also visible, who was also silent, thinking about what had happened between them. As it turned out, the guy still wanted to say a few words, turning to the lady and telling her that he remembered some confusion when he was waiting for Elsha on New Year's Eve. But in the end, his work assignments were delayed, which made it look like someone wanted to deliberately prevent them from meeting. At this point, when the children were also talking about how no information had reached their castle, she imagined two personalities of the Duke, realizing that the rumored aristocrat and the real Rolf were completely different people, which prompted her to think. The lady also remembered the ghost of the Emperor, who shouted at them with rage and anger, thinking that his behavior was also quite strange, as for a ruler who should be fair and pure before everyone. She nevertheless pushed aside her suspicious thoughts, deciding to return to reality and smile sweetly, telling the Duke that she was still glad that the misunderstanding was gone, and now they could talk to each other more calmly. The blue-eyed brunette looked down and agreed with the girl's words, while Wilbert stood behind him smiling, while Elsha was thinking about how she needed to know more about the reason for the Duke's marriage and everyone else. That is why now the lady is standing on the street and looking at the members of her new family, realizing that in order to find out all the necessary information, she needs to act now, but not to clarify everything directly with the Duke and the children. And for this, she has already come up with an idea. She looked at the family with admiration and inspiration, and with a smile suggested that they continue this conversation in the evening, because in fact, she wanted to find out the answer to her questions as soon as possible. But she didn't think that the Duke would immediately ask her why she needed it. But the aristocrat never got an answer to his question, because the lady vaguely answered him that she was offering it to them because Mr. Hugh's stomach would soon be rumbling. And immediately after that, she took the children aside, talking cheerfully to them while Rolf stood behind them in surprise. And the blonde with beautiful red eyes turned to the Duke and with a smile told him to follow them, because it was time for dinner in the banquet hall, which they always looked forward to. Also on the adoptive father of the Smoriola and Hugh and Wilbert, smiling at Rolf and waiting for the moment when he will follow them with happy faces, because now they are not those shy guys who talk only to each other. And such a happy moment struck the Duke so much that at first he was surprised, unnoticed by everyone. But then he smiled warmly and told everyone that he would eagerly follow them, as if now his worries and fears about Elsha were in the background. The Duke's answer made the main character even happier, who smiled at her husband and seemed to look like a sweet cloud, because she had soft, shiny hair, a charming face, and red cheeks, which Rolf involuntarily liked. The girl understands that it is not for nothing that they all want to become a real family, so she hastened to take Hugh's hand and smile at everyone with mercy and joy, while Wilbert and Rolf looked at her, grinning in the same way and preparing to enter the palace together. Thus, one day there was a heavy snowfall, causing white flakes to fall from the sky onto the beautiful castle. And the Galania heroine thought about the fact that a month and a half had already passed since her appearance in the palace, and 2 weeks since the Duke's appearance. During this time, the main character was recognized as a real duchess, because of which the servants began to bow to the girl, because he controlled them. And at that moment, he spoke about a woman named Zirka, that he relied on her. And also the lady understood, they say, she was gradually getting used to a new life. In front of the main character was a blue-eyed lady with a neat hairdo, who was the head of the economy, and according to the plans, she should become a support for the protagonist while she gets used to her new leadership role. And she realized that the lady would eventually come to her in those moments when she was watching her from afar, because Zirka was constantly talking to her subordinates and explaining all the work to them in detail, which is why Elsha understood that she could rely on Zirka. But even after some time, when the heroine had to learn all the necessary information from books in order to become a worthy duchess, the lady sitting on the bed with a desperate face suddenly realized that the red book in her hands was more complicated than expected. And when the lady tried to set herself up for studying and reading a book, and not whine and think that she would not succeed, suddenly she felt cold on her cheek, which made her shudder and turn pale. But, as it turned out, it was Hugh who wanted to touch his mother with his magic hand. She looked at the cute and dressed boy with golden hair, who was happy to see Elsha, and the protagonist responded to him with the same warmth and kindness, thinking that the child in front of her was incredibly charming, as always. With exactly the same suddenness, a maid burst into the main character's bedroom, screaming and rushing to run up to Mr. Hugh, as if she had been trying to catch up with him or say something important all this time. And because of this, the Bonlinka turned her head with a smile while the boy was only looking at the room. Standing in front of the Duchess, the maid told the protagonist that they had just returned from a walk, and that was why Hugh was wearing a white cap and fur coat. And Elsha responded to the girl's words with politeness, saying with surprise that she had not thought that it was already so late, because most likely the lady had spent the whole day with books and papers. And after Hugh had silently, but with a never-fading smile, undressed, getting rid of his hat and clothes for the street, he looked at Elsa, who, together with the maid, was taking various cookies from the table because she wanted to take care of the child. But as soon as she heard Hugh sneeze, the protagonist turned to him with a smile and announced the tea that she would now prepare and bring here, to which the boy responded with a raised hand, agreeing with his mother's proposal. And after a while, the girl looked at the different herbs in the cupboard, which were stored in glass jars, thinking that today's condition of Hugh's throat was not very good, so she needed to do everything to make the child speak less. This time, the main character decided to look in her red book and choose other herbs for Hugh. And when the maid next to her suggested taking something stronger for treatment, the protagonist immediately asked her if she meant some summer leaves, which the red-eyed lady became interested in later. Soon, thanks to the help of the maid, the girl was able not only to prepare delicious and, most importantly, very healthy tea for the child, but also to choose different cookies for him. For example, checkered, faced with jam or with chocolate, which the lady imagined above her head. And the girl got a rich red drink, which was made even more beautiful by the light that fell on it when Elsa served tea to Hugh and wished him a pleasant appetite while adding 1 drop of honey to it. Hugh was very happy with such attention, so he smiled, sitting on the white sofa in front of the table with goodies. And he also looked at the heroine, who was no less happy to take care of him, holding a tray in her hands and telling the little girl to eat everything and get well soon. And while the girl was thinking about how tea with Hugh had become a normal everyday thing for her, although for a small child it was a chance to learn to speak better, she noticed Wilbert enter the room, apologizing for the suddenness, and behind him a maid was visible. And the elder brother Hugh wanted to join the tea party, which is why he hurried to sit down on the sofa with a smile next to the happy boy who was showing his friends a plate of cookies. And the smiling Elsa at this time understood that tea party was not only an opportunity to be together, but also allowed Wilbert to take a break from studying. But as soon as the main character answered Wilbert's question with confusion and incomprehension about how her preparation for the duties of a mistress was going, real fear appeared on the children's faces. The servants behind them began to whisper among themselves, and the heroine herself asked her sons what was wrong. Also, when the children shouted together to the protagonist that there would soon be an incredibly important festival on the occasion of the Duke's birthday, the blonde was horrified, realizing that she had completely forgotten about the main event in the coming days, for which she must prepare every day. But Elsa's indignation knew no bounds, so she decided to burst into the aristocrat's office so suddenly and abruptly that her hand simply swung the doors open, and the shocked lady immediately told Rolf that she had not heard anything about the festival. And the Duke, who was sitting at his desk wearing glasses, immediately raised his eyes to the lady, holding a pen for writing and asking the girl what she meant, because her emotions were not entirely clear to him, and despite her calm face, he was surprised by Elsa's appearance. But as soon as the main character not only approached him with heavy, angry steps, but also slammed her hands on the table with a crash, the Duke became frightened when Elsa appeared right in front of him, who sternly screamed as if she was talking about a festival that was coming up in the future. However, when the aristocrat, taking off his glasses, calmly told the lady that they wanted to call her in the near future in order to consult with her, the red-eyed lady became softer, looking at her husband with surprise and apologizing for having made hasty conclusions and succumbed to emotions. Looking at the protagonist, who had become quiet, obviously mistakenly thinking that she could not take part in a family event, the hero calmly replied that he would have told her about the festival in any case, since he had previously promised that they would resolve all issues concerning the family together. The lady with white hair continued to look at him with surprised red eyes when the Duke looked at her and remembered the first rule in the family, which was to recognize Elsa as a wife and always consult with her. Looking intently at the lady, the Duke told her that he himself does not like such events, and that he is not even organizing the festival of his own free will, which raised questions in Elsa. But he also said that since this will be the protagonist's first open holiday, she needs to prepare. Having heard this, the Duchess became seriously worried, because even beads of sweat flowed down her face when she anxiously asked the aristocrat whether this meant that she would have to prepare for everything, even for magic, which she knew the least and could not wield at all. And the Duke, who was sympathetic to the heroine, said that everything was so, and Elsa would need to demonstrate magic to the guests, because this ceremony was also a kind of exam, at which the Duke would decide whether the main heroine was worthy of living with children. The white-haired girl, who seemed to be in the dark from fear, gulped in worry when Rolf himself thought about the third rule in their relationship, which stated that he had the right to conduct certain tests, and if the protagonist did not pass them, he would lose his parental rights. Suddenly, the Duke was surprised that the lady did not become upset or worry further, because when he wanted to calm her down, saying that she should not take everything so seriously, the lady suddenly leaned towards him and enthusiastically said that, on the contrary, she would prepare so well that she would pass the exam with flying colors. With each passing day, the lady surprised the aristocrat more and more, and therefore he was often surprised by her behavior, character, and appearance. And this time a smile appeared on his face, which is why he wished his wife good luck and said that he would hope for the best. And the girl herself was happy with this turn of events, so she smiled at the Duke and said that he would definitely do everything to make everything work out for her, and would also contact him if any questions arose. After some time, when the girl realized that she needed to prepare more diligently every day, she held a pen in her hands and drew symbols on paper, talking to herself about how there was still 1 month left before the festival, and she needed to do everything and even more. The girl, having written something on paper, showed her creation to Wilbert and Hugh, who were smiling, drinking tea, and also holding paper in their hands, because the protagonist meant that they needed to make a schedule so that everything would happen according to plan and there would be a schedule, thanks to which she would wash away a lot. However, when Wilbert, who continued to sit on the sofa and drink tea with a smile, thinking that all this did not concern him, heard from the heroine that there was one task for him too, the boy was surprised, shuddering on the spot so much that his cup of tea almost spilled. And the lady even pointed her finger at the boy, again saying that it was very important and difficult, so it could not be ignored and especially not carried out. And now the blonde asked the boy not to idle, but to get down to business with her. A worried Wilbert looked at the girl with a cup of hot drink in her hands, not understanding why his mother was exaggerating so much, which he told her. But at this time, Hugh and Elsa were already looking at him, getting ready to tell him everything in more detail. Suddenly, a white-haired girl with red eyes, who had an unquenchable desire to do everything right, angrily showed him a paper with a certain phrase, saying that food should be important to Wilbert, the one he likes and doesn't like. And after some time, the boy had to complete his task, because he was sitting on the banquet table with a blue face from embarrassment, while in front of him was a saucer with some food and a cup of tea, which he was in no hurry to touch, his hands resting on his knees. When all the maids and the same big chef with big muscles gathered around the long table with a white tablecloth, the white-haired lady sitting next to the boy solemnly said that a meeting was beginning on the topic of how to remove Wilbert's dislike for certain foods. The protagonist was completely serious and therefore with a stern expression asked everyone to express their opinion, if they had one, according to the topic of the meeting, while Wybert, amazed by what was happening, remained silent. And the first to decide to speak was the maid Zerka, who raised her hand and loudly told the heroine that she had nothing to say about this. So she asked the mistress for permission to take her leave, which made the protagonist feel embarrassed, confused, but allowed the lady to leave. After Zerka bowed to the Duchess and left, the blonde coughed sheepishly and decided to order the cook to be the first to express his opinion regarding Mr. Wilbert's favorite and least favorite foods. The lady with red eyes looked cheerfully and with a warm smile at the tall, pumped-up chef in a hat and offered to tell him about Wilbert's favorite dishes. But the man himself was in no hurry to speak, peering into the heroine's face. Then the big cook stood near the board with various pictures and text, taking a pointer and a small book in his hands and telling everyone that in order to maintain Mr. Wilbert's health, it is important to maintain a balance of meat and vegetables, which he understands perfectly well. And suddenly a maid with fair hair and a kind smile showed everyone a certain roll of paper, which made the cook stop his story, looking at it, while the servant solemnly said that this was today's dinner for Wilbert. The girl opened the sheet of paper with a slight movement and showed everyone a picture of food, on which a large plate with a piece of mushroom casserole with sliced beets, carrots, cucumbers, and mashed potatoes is visible. But also on that menu there are many vegetables, fish, and cheese, served in the form of a dish called caricade. It was as if it were the result of everything, because the maids who were next to the table looked at the white sheet and spoke about it to the mistress, getting ready to list the changed menu. Of the dish that was served to the boy, only one piece of bread remained on the table. Although there were two, the glass of juice was empty, the mushrooms were not eaten. Wilbert did not even touch the vegetables, leaving them on the plate, which indicated that the brunette ate potatoes and other things, albeit reluctantly, but hated vegetables. The little gentleman didn't like all this very much, because of which everything around seemed to go dark. And he himself, with furrowed brows, asked everyone when they had managed to do and prepare all this. And the boy's words were immediately responded to by those same two maids, who admitted that they were the ones who had prepared such a report, which made the fair-haired lady happy. And the brunette behaved more reservedly, looking at Hugh, who supported his brother with a smile and applause. Wilbert, angry at everyone, clasped his hands when the main character, sitting at the table, looked at the papers and happily told her eldest son that he had eaten the salmon after all, to which he responded with slight irritation, saying that he had at least eaten fish. But the boy's words were interrupted by one black-haired maid, who told everyone that he eats fresh food, but he never even chooses canned food, which made Wilbert even more angry, thinking that his image as a good boy had been damaged. Everyone also looked at Hugh, who ate everything without stopping, which is why the blonde maid looked at him, happily telling everyone that, unlike his older brother, Hugh was not so picky about food, and therefore ate everything with pleasure. And the red-eyed lady began to smile and boast to Hugh about her good appetite. For some reason, she began to smile and be proud of herself, and Wilbert was only amazed at what was happening with his mouth open and such an expression on his face, as if everything was now irritating and outraging him. The pumped-up chef also looked at this and decided to look at everyone and admit that they were trying as best they could, but they also had some limitations that did not allow them to fix everything. Then the cook decided to ask everyone what to do in such a situation, which made the main character shut up and fold her hands, and the others whisper and remain silent, because Wilbert was still sitting at the table and did not even want to touch the food that was in front of him. And suddenly the main character was visited by someone who could solve the problems, and this person turned out to be the Duke, who suddenly leaned over behind the sitting lady and told her that she didn't have to worry about this, which surprised the red-eyed beauty. The girl wanted to turn to him and ask something, but when everyone looked at him in shock, the Duke calmly began his story by saying that he also didn't like vegetables before and didn't even touch them, just like Wilbert now, who is now looking at his dad. The guy looked at the white-haired lady and told everyone that he understood perfectly well that everyone was trying and doing even more than they should, but he also wanted everyone not to panic, because everything was fine, which surprised Elsha. And the Duke's words made the main character smile so happily and warmly that it seemed that everything around her also became brighter and more attractive, because the girl agreed with the man's words and said that, for a start, it would be good to start everything with small steps. But, as it turned out, not everyone was so happy, because Wilbert was still lonely and sad, and he didn't say anything, which made the lady look at him and ask what was wrong. And the sad boy only asked everyone how they learned to eat vegetables. The Duke realized that this question was asked of him, which is why he also began to feel sad, remembering the past and starting his sad story with the fact that he once met a girl who ate wax incredibly appetizingly, which he remembered for the rest of his life. And everyone was surprised by this, because Hugh, Elsha, and Wilbert looked at the aristocrat with their mouths slightly open and silently waited for the moment when he would tell this story in more detail. Rolf told about Wilbert's mother named Clara, who has golden hair and a pleasant, sweet face. But most of all, the Duke remembered how she brought pieces of vegetables to her lips and with a great appetite, which surprised the young master. At that moment, he was standing behind her and could not take his eyes off her as she, with long hair and a smile on her face, seemed to be eating simple vegetables. But Rolf was then sure that the girl was eating something unusual and amazing if she found it so tasty and pleasant. He also remembered the main character telling everyone that he also eats cutely, just like the White Rabbit, and also the Duke of Wilbert's story. But this story, it seems, will not be useful to him. But then he himself did not notice how he also began to eat vegetables. And the girl, with a strong urge to prove that she was eating everything in the castle for a reason, began to show the aristocrat her thumbs up and say that she was eating everything because the food in the castle was incredibly tasty, and she couldn't stop herself from eating the goodies. Suddenly, an idea came into Wilbert's head, which caused him to immediately turn to the black-haired maid named Gita and ask her to bring the vegetables as soon as possible, which caused the lady to look at the boy. And when the maid immediately disappeared from the room and ran to the kitchen for vegetables, the white-haired Duchess looked at Wilbert and told him that if he didn't want to eat something, he didn't have to force himself. But the boy insisted on his own, which is why he didn't listen to her. Wilbert just remained silent, and in such a short time, the maid Gita had already managed to bring a plate with pieces of vegetables and also a basket of bread, which she presented to the gentleman on a tray, fulfilling the order. The gentleman with blue eyes, although he didn't really like vegetables, still wanted to do something, which is why she looked at the food in front of her with furrowed brows, as if preparing for something, while the maid placed the tray on the table. But everyone was surprised by the fact that the boy Adez did not pick up the utensils, but only looked at Elsha and first asked the lady to try the food from his tray, which surprised the girl, who even asked the boy again if he was sure about it. Wilbert insisted that the girl try the vegetables, so the white-haired lady decided not to resist, but silently took the bread with a small piece of vegetable in her hand, which she was already bringing to her mouth, wanting to bite into, which even looked beautiful. A second later, the girl blushed, chewing the delicious food, which made her look even more charming, chewing appetizingly and cutely, which surprised everyone around. And this is exactly what Wilbert wanted. Everyone looked at her and did not look away, and some even rejoiced and admired what was happening, while the brunette with blue eyes, unlike everyone else, looked at the lady with passion and interest. But what struck everyone even more was that at first Wilbert didn't even want to stick a slice of cucumber into his fork, but then he brought it to his lips and tried to bite it, while trembling with uncertainty and resisting this. But the desire to overcome his dislike of vegetables was stronger. He even hurried to drink some water in order to catch his breath, and when he put it on the table with a bang, looking at everyone present, who clapped their hands with joy, and Wilbert said that if he wants something, he will succeed, because he is the future great duke who can do everything. And even the duke, who was standing behind the main character, was happy about this, telling Wilbert that he was a real good guy. And the blonde with red eyes was also happy about this, clapping for the child and saying that he was cool. After this, the boy looked at the bitten piece of cucumber and asked the maids to give him more pickles from that moment on, and to mix them with other food so that he could eat it and gradually get used to it. Everyone agreed with the words of the little dog, so they smiled and looked at the gentleman with joy and admiration, encouragingly looking at Wilbert, who solved the problems with his motivation to become better, to be the same great duke as Rolf. After that, a bunch of maids surrounded Wilbert. Gira began to write down the report on paper. Others with Ali watched with admiration as the little man held a fork with a cucumber in his hands, and Hugh also clapped for his brother, while at this time the Duke turned his head to the cook and looked at him. The cook asked the Aristarcat if he would like something to drink, whereupon, when he looked at Rolf, the nobleman said that he would like to drink grog, which is a hot alcoholic cocktail made from rum, water, and sugar, which the Duke often likes to drink. The main character heard this too, and with a smile she wanted to tell the cook that the Duke always drinks either grog or coffee with cheese, which she noticed over time. But at first the cook did not respond to her words because he froze, standing with his back to her. Suddenly the cook ordered the girl to whisper about it, or not to talk about it at all, after which he left, and the main character remembered the face of the tall and muscular cook, recalling that Mr. Burt also did not like vegetables, which makes her think. And the red-eyed girl really fell silent, looking down and pondering her last thoughts, which made her plunge deeper and deeper into silent reflections about the mystical and strange aristocratic family. Even when the girl was in bed and seemed to be already asleep, seeing the third Mon, she looked at the ceiling and thought in her mind about the Duke's family, which did not give her peace. Or rather, she thought about a specific person, Rolf's older brother. She remembered in her mind the broad-shouldered Rolf in a formal suit and with dark blue hair, also thinking about the fact that in fact Mr. Berta did not like vegetables, which she knew and understood perfectly well, like it was a fact. The fact is that she remembered the Duke's elder brother, who had also been a great aristocrat before Rolf, and also imagined Clara with golden hair next to him. But now the lady does not understand why Rolf recently spoke about him as if he were himself. After that, the lady turned over on her other side with the same thoughts and sadness, thinking that she still wouldn't be able to ask Rolf about this directly. But she was also worried about the recent incident with Hugh, namely why the Emperor's spirit often came to him. She recalled such a terrible picture, remembering also that the spirit of the mad Emperor, who was in front of Hugh and smiled at her with madness, covered the boy's mouth, which is why the lady wonders why everything is so strange. And the lady also remembered the first day of the report, when she sat on the bed with the Duke and read him all the news from a book, and the man listened to her attentively. But the lady was also preparing to tell him about the strange situation with Hugh. She told the hero with a sly smile that he had already made a report for this week, which is why the black-haired guy thanked her for every job. But the white-haired lady was not ready to leave so easily. The lady wanted to ask the Herg about the Emperor at that moment, because of which the aristocrat told her that he understood everything perfectly well and therefore prepared for her a large stack of books, to which the lady turned in shock, while the aristocrat said that by asking all this, perhaps, he would find answers to his questions. Now the girl, lying on her side, looked at the books with a smile, and she wanted to believe that by reading them, she would be able to find out why little Hugh was seeing such a terrible emperor and visions with him. But everything turned out to be not so simple. She imagined an open book with a large picture in her head, thinking that in order to know the relationship between the emperor and the duke better, she needed to find out history and even read fairy tale myths. And now the main character calmly looks at the kings, being in bed, and thinks that the time she read the books, or rather, only the first of them, she did not understand anything, but realized that it would take her a year and a half to read everything, and now she has other things to take care of. The first thing the lady remembered and imagined in her head was carrots with various spices and potatoes, because she still needs to take care of her winter diet, which will obviously change due to the changing season. The lady also imagined herself shaking hands with a certain silhouette, realizing that the problem of food was not the only one, because there would also be inflation of magic and problems in international relations, and she also needed to prepare a gift for the emperor. And now, when the protagonist is lying in bed and wants to fall asleep, she sees a pile of books on the table in front of her and realizes that she needs to study all of this, and the desire to quickly learn everything increasingly takes hold of the heroine. As a result, when the girl first tried to read at least one page of the book but could not do anything, she suddenly got out of bed and wanted to scream from despair because she wanted to lie down and study at the same time, which could almost tear her into two parts. Then the girl realized that she needed to work much more efficiently, which is why the very next day she, together with the children, found herself in a carriage from which a snowy city was visible, a street with glowing lanterns where there were stalls with food and shops. Wilbert just folded his arms and looked away, telling the lady that this way she wouldn't have time or remember anything, and that it would be better for her to do everything one by one, which caused the white-haired lady to fall silent indignantly. And even when Wilbert folded his arms and wanted to tell the girl something unpleasant about the memories associated with this city, the girl only closed her eyes and folded the book and told the boy that she didn't even want to hear anything about it. But most of all, Hugh was happy about the walk, who found himself behind the main character and, wanting to attract her attention, touched her sleeve, and the red-eyed lady already wanted to turn to him curiously. The thing is that the boy wanted to enthusiastically show the girl a snow-covered tree without leaves, with high branches, which was located among tall buildings and on which birds sometimes sat. And the main character with Wilbert and Hugh looked at the ordinary tree with enthusiasm and interest, while the red-eyed lady happily said that there were many similar trees in the city, and the smart brunette next to her answered that this tree was called Snowball. The boy explained to the lady that the tree has the same name as the capital of the city itself, for the reason that during the flowering period, all the streets are covered with the leaves of this flowering tree, which also smell pleasant, which made the lady even more happy, and she smiled from ear to ear. The girl confessed that she was already waiting for the time when everything would bloom, and suddenly she noticed a certain lady in front of her who had a neat hairdo and seemed to be a local, which is why she was looking at the visiting protagonist, who immediately noticed someone else's gaze on her. And the simpleton, it seems, did not expect at all that the lady, who was apparently dressed in an expensive coat and was clearly from a noble family, wanted to greet the woman kindly, even smiling at her, which made everything around her brighter. And while the little Prasushka was silent, as if from shock or bewilderment, the blonde herself looked at her and understood that ordinary people did not treat aristocrats so well, because she was used to feeling the cold in her direction. But suddenly, in front of the drying room with red hair, a black-haired guy appeared, who indignantly told her that the woman standing in front of her was the wife of the Grand Duke, and he was hinting to her not just to look at her, but to show respect and say hello. Then the woman looked at the protagonist more closely and Shkinuyushchik, asking Elsha if she had arrived from the Empire, as if her defeat knew no bounds and the simpleton was in no hurry to go anywhere, even though she was holding a baby in her arms. Only after this did the woman bow to the heroine so sharply and low that the blonde in front of her did not expect this at all, and therefore looked at her with shock, while the woman with the child begged the lady to forgive her for her disrespect and bad manners. And the girl wanted to calm the lady down and explain that everything was fine, so she waved her palms and looked excitedly at the bowing lady, telling her that she didn't need it, so she could rise. But the lady didn't expect at all that not only the city lady would bow to her, because suddenly all the passers-by who were nearby began to bow before the main character, and they did not even intend to raise their heads until the lady herself said something to them. But Elsa was in shock, not understanding how this could happen to her, because she always considered herself simple. The red-eyed lady was shocked, looking at everyone with big eyes, and the girl also looked at Wilbert, who calmly looked at what was happening and said that it was impossible for them to know the culture of the city directly, because they were aristocrats. That's why Wilbert was calm, looking at all the people worshipping them, and the white-haired lady, on the contrary, held hands and looked at all the people with shyness and awkwardness, because the lady realized that she and the other aristocrats were completely different from ordinary people. Wilbert disliked this the most, and he quickly turned away from everyone and told the girl with his eyes closed that they needed to go because they were bothering people, which made the blonde look at him with shock. But she still wanted to object in a whisper, even though she doubted it. But suddenly the boy saw a picture in front of him, where right in the city 3 little boys were playing snowballs, and therefore making balls out of snow, laughing and continuing to play, also making various figures out of snow. And when Wilbert stopped and began to look intently at the happy children, who probably had no worries and who were simply enjoying life, he suddenly began to babble, which was noticed by the main character, who was standing behind him and looking at the boy. The girl also finally became convinced that the children were sad and wanted to feel the joy of childhood and a happy childhood at that moment when Hugh appeared under her hand, sad and silent, which is why the lady realized that the boys wanted to play. And unexpectedly for everyone, the blonde began to happily wave her hand with a smile and tell the children nearby that she also wanted to play with them, which stunned Hugh and Wilbert, who were standing nearby and did not believe that a grown woman was behaving like a child. The boys, one of whom had red hair, immediately noticed the cheerful woman. So even when they were holding snowballs in their hands, they turned their heads towards her with curiosity and shock, realizing that an aristocrat was in front of them. But the white-haired duchess already wanted to act, so she immediately molded a small snowball and threw it towards the children, playfully shouting with joy to the children to catch it, which, according to the lady's idea, would help her become closer to the children. And the children were so surprised by what was happening that they began to look at the lady with big eyes and an open mouth, forgetting even about the game, because they were going to dodge Lay's snowballs and ask her what she meant. However, when the snowball that the protagonist threw towards the children didn't even reach the ground, but crashed into the snow halfway, the children, and especially the child with red hair, laughed out loud, calling the Duchess a clumsy person. This didn't stop the girl because she quickly made a new snowball and started playing with the children herself, laughing with them, while surprised Wilbert and Hugh looked at her and talked about how cool Elsa was. But when the blue-eyed brunette looked at the woman playing with the children with deep thoughts, he suddenly thought about how Elsa treated everyone equally, which suddenly made him shut up. Think about it more. The boy even grabbed his heart and tried to understand what was happening to him now, because he felt something strange, but he did not even suspect that at this time a snowball was already flying at his head, which Hugh noticed. The snowball still broke on his head, which made Wilbert dissatisfied and start shaking the snow out of his hair and telling everyone that it was painful and that he doesn't really like these kinds of games. But suddenly a group of guys started telling him that they weren't even surprised, because Wilbert was weak compared to them. The red-haired boy, like his other friends, were already making new snowballs and looking at Wilbert with sly smiles, saying that he was just a coward who couldn't compete with them, and the boy behind him only agreed with the words of the first. And when the red-haired guy wanted to hurt Wilbert once again and convince him that he was weak, suddenly they realized that it had become dark, because 2 large shadows of tall people were falling on them, and the guys turned around not understanding what had happened. Turning around, they realized with horror that in front of them stood the Grand Duke with a stern expression on his face, who was staring at them and asking what was wrong with his children, while the aristocrat's subordinate was also looking at them. The appearance of the city's leader frightened the boys so much that they quickly began to tremble with fear and grab onto each other, as if wanting to quickly escape from the evil and strict Duke, dressed in dark clothes. As it turned out, the red-haired boy did not quite understand who was standing in front of him and then shouted at the Duke, asking him who he was, as if he was seeing him for the first time in his life, also looking at him with shocked blue eyes. Then the servant, a man next to the Duke, who was covered in scars and even on his face there were healed scratches, told the children that in front of them now was the great Duke who ruled the entire iceberg. But the aristocrat himself looked at his children, asking everyone what had happened. And at this time, the boys themselves bowed to the Duke and were silent because they were very ashamed, and they even shook with fear, until one of them put his hand on the head of the red-haired boy, hinting to him to also bow to the aristocrats. But suddenly, the main character appeared in front of them, showed the Duke her index finger, and explained to her husband that she herself asked the boys to play snowballs because she wanted to get a feel for the city's culture, and also realized that for Wilbert and Hugh, it would be a good experience, which made the boy even more indignant. And at that moment, they plucked up their courage and looked at their parents. And Wilbert Ade clenched his fist, sternly telling them that they still wanted to show the boys their physical abilities, to prove that they were not cowards. Then the aristocrat looked at all the children with the understanding and calm that was always with him. And the main character, looking at this, suddenly realized that a brilliant idea had come into her head, which she immediately liked. And the Duke was incredibly surprised that the main character personally invited him to join the game of Nikuai, because of which the stunned guy even thought that he had misheard, which also shocked the servant nearby. But everything turned out to be reality. The children who were nearby and heard everything perfectly were no less shocked, and so they looked at the Duchess with stunned faces, while Elsa herself thought about the idea and admitted to everyone that she already knew that the children would be happy about it. And an even better idea came into the head of the blonde with red eyes when she realized that playing together and spending time together would allow the children to become closer to their father, which would also improve the relationship in the family, which made the lady even happier. After this, Elsa looked at the Gurg with surprise and only now asked him what he was doing here, because she understood that his sudden appearance in the city could certainly be carried out for an important reason. The blue-eyed brunette explained to the woman that today they had walked around the city and looked at it. But since the time for this had already run out, he believed that they could devote some time to other, more important matters. For example, devote an hour to his family. And at this time, the servant behind him was silent and listened to everything. And when the servant with scars on his face turned away from the Duke with a sigh and said that he could spend a little time playing with the children, the Duke looked at everyone and said that in that case, they could already have fun, which made the children even more surprised in front of him. The boys who had previously worshipped the aristocrat began to look at each other as if they did not believe what they had just heard. And Wilbert and Hugh looked at Elsa with admiration and anticipation of fun, and the lady herself clapped her hands with satisfaction. Therefore, an hour after the Duke allowed everyone to play snowballs on a larger scale, all the heroes found themselves in a spacious field where there was an incredible amount of snow and everything seemed to be covered only with it. And the sun, illuminating such beauty, only decorated the incredible landscape. And the main heroine, with Wilbert, Hugh, and the Duke, who also stood next to the three boys, stood in a hurry to a certain snowfield, on which barricades of the same snow were erected, serving as a shelter for those who would play a snowball fight. And also, besides those residents who looked at the teams in surprise, there was a servant on the field, a girl with purple eyes holding a paper in her hands, and explained to them that there was a team called Snow, which included Wilbert, Hugh with Elsa, and the man with scars, and there was also a team called Wolves, which was led by Rolf and the guys. The girl, imaginary two figures, when one of them had a flag in her hands, explained to the teams that the winners are those who take this flag or the team in which the most participants remain, because if someone gets hit by a snowball, they fly out. Also, the maid in the role of judge told everyone that the teams cannot use magic or other objects as weapons, which she also imagined above her head, when the judge warned everyone that in order for each team to have an equal chance of winning, the Duke and his servants would have their working hands tied. And the lady smiled, clenching her hands into fists and realizing that this way they had a chance of winning. But she was even more pleased that they could all get closer.